Yeah, anyway, we were just introducing ourselves. So yeah, I'm Stefan. So I work as a civil engineer. I specialize in transportation stuff. Worked in the U.S. for a couple years, and then got really sick of the U.S. system. So I decided, I got kind of tired of just reading about all the amazing projects they were doing in the Netherlands. So I thought, why don't I just try going over there, try working over there as an engineer, and maybe I can learn something from them, and maybe I could even bring what I learned back with me someday as a specialist in infrastructure that works really well. So that's pretty much what I've been busy with for pretty much the whole past year. I work for a Dutch company. I work mainly on street and bicycle projects now, and I love every minute of it. And my free time, I'm making videos about streets made of paving stones, right, and gigantic bicycle parking garages. So yeah, I like to post content like that.
Okay, Steph and I worked together a little bit in the past, and we work a little bit together now, which is great. Um, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Vignesh Swaminathan. I'm a civil engineer here in the Bay Area. I run the firm Crossroad Lab. I've been running it for about a little over 5 years now. Before that, I was a parking engineer and a highway engineer. I took a lot of that experience to kind of work on bicycle and pedestrian projects here in the Bay Area. I also sit as a few different local commission roles, which I advocate for people to join in. I think that's the best way to participate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Hey, pedestrian dignity.
Hello, good to see you all. Yes.
Community engagement. We have a specialist right here in the bottom corner down here. We're just introducing ourselves. So if you want to introduce yourself, Jonathan, about the kind of work you do.
Oh, sweet. Well, it's so good to be with you all. I consider myself primarily an artist and an activist, advocate, but lots of things, storyteller. So have been moving and hosting walking, rolling, transit engagement events related to mobility justice, primarily access, safety, health, for years. So just care a lot about this and grateful to be playing in the TikTok group live. This is my first one. So
Welcome.
yeah.
Adam, what about you? You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, Adam, Everyday Engineering. I'm an engineer, City of New Haven, Connecticut Engineering Department, mainly working on a lot of transportation projects, roadways, sidewalks, bike lanes, all sorts of stuff that municipal government works on. I did work in the private sector for a few years right out of college, so I got both sides there going on. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really happy you brought that up. Actually, I had a question about that. I kind of worked on the public and the private side. So which one did you like working in better? And if yeah, you had a new engineer who wanted to choose one, what would you advise them to do? Is there one you would choose first, or is there one that's just better than the other?
Yeah, I would say right now I actually enjoy working in the public sector a little more. I think just because we tend to have a little more control over how our projects get designed. A consultant is going to be working with the client. The client might have a vision of what to do, but here at the city, like we're pretty much our own client. I mean, the all of our residents are our clients, really.
Mhm.
Kind of make our designs and do what's best without having to go back and forth with someone.
That's very true. No, I'm in the private sector now, but when I was in the public sector, you have a lot of control because you can really adjust the designs. You can make sure it curtails exactly to the local businesses or whoever is needed there. And so there are pros and cons to both. And I think the public sector at this time, kind of when the economy kind of is coming back, is a good place to be.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You guys are kind of opposites. So like Vignesh, you went from public to private, and Adam, you went from private to public. So yeah, you see a lot of that kind of going back and forth. Yeah, myself,
Hmm.
I just started off completely private. I did one public internship. That was about it. So I'm purely on the private side. I have wanted to work for one of the Dutch cities before, but my Dutch unfortunately is not good enough for that yet. You pretty much have to be totally fluent in Dutch to work for a Dutch city, and Dutch is not an easy language to learn by any means. Um, and yeah,
It's so
Jonathan, you're from Colorado. You live in Denver, right?
yeah. So I'm in Denver, Colorado mostly. I spend a lot of time walking for days and days in different places. But I honor each of you all. Like this is such a I'm always talking with different people. There's people who are on the edges of the inside of the systems and people who are on the edges of the outside. And there's a lot of lines that spaces in between all that. But you all represent, you give me hope um, in the midst of, I move with a lot of engineers in this work and have for years. And it's, as you all know, it's just a complex, heavy, very uphill to legitimize other forms of transportation than just the car. And so to have you all in the TikTok space and obviously in the real lived, the nuts and bolts, I'm out there getting creative, kind of on the edge of the outside, constantly in relationship with engineers and planners. But I'm running around screaming and cussing at intersections and drawing pictures and doing poetry and speaking at committee hearings, and we need all the different people to be showing up to this. But I really honor each of you who are holding the legitimacy of other forms of transportation other than the car, not getting rid of the car, but legitimizing other forms in your engineering and are leading with that. And I just really honor it. So yes, your question was Denver, Colorado. I went on.
Yeah, yes, I'm curious. So you've walked across the whole country before, I think multiple times, right? Is there like one city that, in your opinion, is like by far the worst for walking? And like, was there like one that was like by far the best, or are a lot of them just similar for you?
Oh my gosh, it's there were some places. There were some places in Missouri and in Kansas, definitely Midwest. Getting into the West and the suburbs, it's pretty consistent. There's just a cut and paste development of how spread out and sprawly, as we all know, as all this stuff got built around the automobile. But that's what was interesting about walking across. I started in Delaware and made my way to San Francisco, and I landed in towns every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes. I'm sorry, every 10, 12, 15 miles on foot, ending in a town, ending in a village. And, you would go days and days without ending into towns or village. And if you did, you're hitting these horrible, inaccessible, totally disconnected strip mall developments all the way across the Midwest and the West. So there's not one place in particular. It's a cut and paste horrible in a lot of ways. There's some good stuff. There's some good examples, but it's very micro. It's very like case by case, road by road. And that's the part that frustrates me so much as an advocate storyteller is the legitimacy of being a pedestrian from A to B is it's just obliterated in our systems. We don't see full trips unless you're in like the core of Manhattan or places like that as being supported. So yeah, lots of rough places.
Yeah, I think what's really good about when you go across the country and you see everything car centric, I think it makes us think about like how did we get here and why and who is pulling those strings, right? And what strings are going to be pulled in the future. And I think with all of us in here, I think it's a very good conversation to have about where we're at and where we're headed, and how we can move it that way. From my side of what things, I work with developers. I sometimes work for some of the tech campuses. I also work on highway projects and building development projects. And I see their goals and interests as well. And I try to curtail them to do more bike ped. But I've seen for a long time, and Adam, I'd love for you I love your opinion on this, but I've seen a lot of by the lobbyists, by the big tech companies of why we do infrastructure for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And now, as advocates like Pedestrian Dignity and other folks have been elevating different voices, now we're starting to think that we have to curtailed to the citizens, the community. But that's kind of you might think that's such a basic concept, but that's really a new concept that a lot of cities are starting to think about, in terms of, instead of looking at your parking minimums and what's needed for a new mall or a new Walmart, starting to think about what the local community-based organization is advocating for, what the bike ped community is advocating for, what the disabled or visually impaired community is advocating for, and curtailing it towards that. And that shift has only recently, in the last, like, I'd say 10 years, started to go in that direction. And that we have to continue to carry that torch forward. But Adam, do you feel like you've seen the same thing in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for the city of New Haven at least. Like, instead of trying to incentivize big box store developments on the fringes of town, we're really starting to see a focus from pretty much everyone in town that we want our city to be a livable place for the people who live there and not for the people who are just kind of passing through. And so I think we repealed like here, but there's just a lot of like these surface parking lots that are for craters in the middle of town, in order to serve, free parking for cars that are now just being turned into housing and mixed developments. And we're just saying, through the parking, we're putting housing here. And we're seeing more of that. We're seeing more connections. We're seeing a desire to put in public spaces where people can gather, within some of these new developments or just in general. So yeah, I think there's a pretty big appetite we see here that people want more livable human scale cities and are starting to finally see the destruction that the accommodation of private vehicles has done to these places.
Adam, so with traffic engineers' solution to traffic to drive-throughs being to order drive-through employees to work faster, is Hamden doomed to the same drive-through apocalypse as Trumbull, Connecticut is?
Yeah, so Hamden, so that's the town I live in. It's one town north of New Haven where I work. They recently replaced a walk-in only Starbucks with parking with a drive-through Starbucks, and just the layout of it is, the entrance of the driveway is at other driveway intersections. But yeah, the first day it was open, the whole drive-through filled up, which is just incredible because people were frequenting that location before without a drive-through just fine, and it was causing all sorts of messes. And I think, the town governments like to approve these new developments because they new renovated store, like, it'll look nice, it'll be good for business, it'll help our economy, it'll be convenient for people to get their coffee. But in reality, it just makes it entirely inconvenient. And I feel like a lot of these towns aren't realizing that if you keep designing infrastructure to make it easier to drive your car, you're going to get more cars and you're going to get all the traffic problems that come with it. So hopefully they see what's going on there. But, we see this trend, especially with Starbucks, that they keep replacing all their locations with new renovated locations that have drive-throughs where they didn't have them before. So.
Yeah, it's like pretty much one of the best examples I can think about induced demand, right? You build literally new car infrastructure, you just literally induced 10 times worse traffic. And, it's a pretty, instead of having to study an intersection over the course of 10 to 15 years, you just literally have before and after photos of a drive-through. It's like, look, everyone used to park and go in, and now, we have an even bigger traffic problem because we built for it, right?
Yeah. Incredible that you see the difference the day it opens. Whereas if you add a lane to a highway, it might take a few years to see that traffic increase. But here it's instant, like case study, real life.
Yeah, Vignesh, you actually, I think you went to the East Coast recently, right? You went to Boston, San Jose. Like, what does Boston do that you think is significantly different than San Jose that you like?
Sure. For one thing, in Boston, I didn't see a single occupancy home in the city. I walked around, everything was multiple stories and dense. I was looking in San Francisco, you go a few blocks from one of the tall skyscrapers and you'll see Victorian homes within a few blocks. And those Victorian homes are worth multi-million dollars because of location. But it's just that nobody's going to be able to afford it except for a legacy. And in Boston, I really saw a lot of walkability and density. I saw a lot of historic walkability, which I thought was really cool. They had a trail that kind of got disconnected by the city, but they had bricks laid down in the ground around, so it was like a historic way for people to navigate, so they can continue on to the trail. And I saw a lot of value of history, that everything is being kind of built around and with a density, compared to San Francisco, where you see a lot of history is more preserved than it is kind of, how do I explain? It's, you have the roads and then you have the homes, but there isn't actually history in the street. You know, that history in the street is missing a lot in San Francisco. You have curb, gutter, asphalt, you know, and it's just, and I think that preservation of combination of history while keeping it walkable, I think was really, really nice in Boston. One other thing I saw in Boston is they have a lot of left side bike lanes on Boston, along the medians, and they have a lot of large bike boxes, and I think that's because of snowplows and debris in the bike lane. And so I know his left side bike lanes may discourage some people from getting on a bike because it's kind of hard to get to, but I thought it was a cool difference.
They also use granite for the curbs, right?
Yes, they use a lot of granite. I pointed it out in my video, and a lot of different areas will use materials that are readily available, because that's smarter and cheaper, and it's less impact to the environment if you use material that's readily available. The reason concrete is one of the worst things for climate is actually because you have to transport rock to your location, and the transportation of such a heavy rock to go build it makes it such a carbon it uses a lot of carbon to throughout its process. And so I thought that was very cool to see the historic use of granite in Boston. And they had a lot of good protected bike lanes that have been there for a long time. When I went to Cambridge, I got a ride with the NACTO group, and some of the folks worked on some of those first facilities, and some of the bike lanes are still blue, which is cool, before green and red. And so, yeah, it's cool to kind of see some of that history. But I think a big takeaway is that everybody needs more housing. Everybody needs more walkability. I know Boston's got a lot really expensive because of the lack of housing, even though I was applauding their density. But at the end of the day, we need to have a combination of both. And sometimes even some of those things are outside of our hands. But advocates, a lot of that is in their hands. And so, pedestrian dignity. How do you see like the conversation of housing and walkability come together, and kind of think about like the concept of a third place in people's lives?
Yeah. I just on the topic of Boston, there's an amazing organization community called the Ujima, the Boston Ujima Project. And I stay updated via their emails. I was a little more involved when I was doing working in co-ops. But what I love, and this connects to Vignesh, what you were saying earlier, and just literally grassroots discernment, participatory budgeting, filtering what comes into our community and what doesn't come into our community via the community, the people that live there, not just a few people within the community, but like this really democratic, horizontal, justice-centered, family-centered, access-centered, healthy food-centered, very, anti-racism-centered. I mean, all these things that just don't show up enough inside of systems and inside of discernments around development and housing and projects within cities and even private companies. And so the Boston Ujima Project, to me, is a good example to your question of like a community that has organized itself to power in numbers to literally be voting on housing projects that come into their various boundaries of community. That if anything is coming in, they're watching out for it, they're organizing together. The pressure on something that feels predatory is quick and loud and organized. So I think the more people can organize each other and have just more accountability to be looking out and noticing, kind of like, the Adam, your amazing video with the Starbucks. It's like, who within that 1 mile radius is being trained and supported and mobilized to say, I don't want this. What the hell is this doing? This is my community. How are families and communities, and connected and supported financially with meals and childcare, all these things with cross language interpretation to be civically engaged around and within this their 1-2 mile radius of where they live, related to housing and intersections and sidewalks and access. And so it's just so clear, those bridges and the training and the invitations, just there's a lot of gaps in how community is nurtured to be actively engaged in nurturing and caring for and protecting their space and their community, and having not just kind of a voice 1 hour a month in the evening on Zoom, but like having relational power and really putting that accountability on anybody that would be making decisions going into where people live and where they have lived. So I don't know. I know I'm getting a little more, but I just think the Ujimi project in Boston is one it's modeling that in a way that I think a lot of cities and towns and communities should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. So with the community engagement part, so I know in Denver they just passed 307, which has something to do with sidewalks, and I wanted to like find out a little bit more about that. And how do you think that's going to change Denver? And what could other cities do? Like that could be like their version of 307. And can you tell us a little bit more about that, just for people who don't know what it is?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So 307 is a local. It's an initiated ordinance that was put together, mostly organized by a local advocacy organization. So just another, if your town or county or community doesn't have a group of people who, whether it's volunteer or paid or part-time, that are organizing specifically around mobility justice issues, and in partnerships with private and public developments and engineers and planners, but very much advocacy oriented. Denver Streets Partnership is here in the city and was kind of the lead organization around putting this bill together and working with different people who have a lot of experience. And how do you fund these things and language it, and how do you get it on the ballot, and just the process for the public to organize and get something on the ballot. And then we're currently this committee is in the middle of how do we now implement the city, specifically to figure out what this means day by day, and so that's another phase. But it's basically the initiative is money for sidewalks. Denver is, like most cities, many cities, 40, 50, 60% missing sidewalks or broken sidewalks in everyday networks. And the current period can complete 400 years. So the city is currently infilling and doing projects. And so the public, we collected 10,000 signatures, we got it on the ballot, and it would be a fee for homeowners. So based on adjacent sidewalk square footage, homeowners would pay X number of dollars towards this fund that would, until the network was complete. And so the current bill is positioned to say within 9 years, we're going to complete the sidewalk network as compared to 400. So in big learning curve for everybody involved, we are thrilled. The reality is the public organized and the public voted it in. So just to see the campaign called Denver Deserves Sidewalks. We were out there, lots of outreach, lots of people organizing, and we won. It was a tight race, but we won it. And so I think just in and of itself, in terms of getting things on the ballot, it's a huge outreach, education, helping people to pay attention to something that they may not be paying attention to. I got so many messages from people saying, "Oh, I had no idea," or "Now I'm thinking about this in a different way. Oh, I would so much rather be walking more and not using my car every day." You just get messages from all kinds of people affirming affirming it, people asking really constructive, good questions about the policy, about the fee. So there's going
It's like this, it's lacking a little bit for me. Is lagging for you guys?
to be some amendments. Sorry about that.
The Denver
Can you all
internet
hear me?
is lacking a little bit. Yeah.
We can hear you. You're lagging a little bit at the end there. But yeah, it's important to have good ballot measures. Sorry, go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off.
No. All I was saying at the end when it is just that it's going to go through several amendments. Like we really want to make sure this is equitable. So someone that it's really complicated how we get the money, as you all know, where the money comes from, and we're still not ready to take money away from money in car reality. So what's unfortunate is sidewalks and other forms of transportation have to be add-ons, and that really, I'm curious even to your thoughts on just how you all process walking and bike mobility and transit always have to be seen as add-on, as extra, as we can't touch what are those gaps. I feel like it's just a question that I would love to hear what you all think. But in terms of the ballot initiative, it's really good to see that it's out there, and changes will be coming to it. But we're celebrating it. Yeah.
Yeah. One of you made a really interesting point there because I read a couple of great articles that talk about a lot of pedestrian infrastructure is actually car infrastructure. So when they'll build these bridge overpasses where pedestrians will walk over a really busy road, and they say like, oh yeah, it is a safety improvement, right? But the whole point of that project is just to get them way out of the cars, so you can have 8 lanes of car traffic still ripping through the middle of the city. So when these kind of projects, I think they do have to be a little bit more fundamental. It has to be, well, for me, it always comes back down to, what purpose do you want for the travel service, right? If you want a road, do you want a street, right? Because if you tell me, hey, I want an efficient road that moves traffic from one side of this city to the other, we can do that. A car might be at the center of it, but you can have plenty of room for other forms of transit. Whereas if you tell me, hey, I want a street, well, then it's going to be almost no cars on the street. And then it's going to be almost completely pedestrianized and more cyclists. And then you might have a very unhappy car driver who has to, drive 15 miles an hour just to get to his final destination. But yeah. I think for me, I think it comes down to just first asking the question of what purpose, what function do we want out of the travel service? Because if you tell me this travel service is mainly meant for pedestrians, it's a lot easier for us to then design for that. Whereas if we're just inheriting a previous design and they just tell us we want this to be more pedestrian friendly, right? We don't often know what that means at the engineering level. And for us, all that might mean is, making the sidewalk just a little bit wider instead of actually making it really, really pleasant for everybody to use.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but I want to hear what Adam, go ahead.
There's in like ped and bike stuff kind of being on the side as an add-on, there is a lot of societal momentum on upholding like a car-centric society. When most of these big wide roads were planned out, there may have been opposition, but they just kind of got steamrolled. Like here's your wide road, it's going to be filled with cars, take it. And now when we try to undo that, like you trying to take away 3 parking spaces on a street, you get a whole community coming out in outrage. You get your local leaders saying, well, we can't do that. We can't take away parking spaces. We can't take away one of the 5 lanes on this road and make it. And so it's a struggle to try to undo all of it. And I know like from like an ownership and maintenance perspective, where the roads can be all city owned and maintained and they can be plowed by the city, yet the sidewalks, as a property owner, you're responsible for your sidewalk. You're responsible for plowing your sidewalk. I mean, can you imagine if you had to snowplow the little chunk of road in front of your house? Like how upset that would make people trying to drive through when it's clear that there's a big chunk of snow. That's exactly what people using the sidewalks or bike lanes are experiencing when you throw the ownership of non-car road stuff to individual people instead of also having it be the city's ownership as it is for roads.
Yeah,
Totally.
and a lot of it has to do with the maintenance and operations of it. And I think what we really need to do is, and I think about this a lot, is how do we make the fundamental change? And I think it has a lot to do with our standard details. It has a lot to do with the new, young, wide-eyed engineer or planner coming in and being mentored by another engineer and unlearning some of these things that are there. And even though we may have these themes, we may have these things on the internet, we may have all these advocacy, if they don't have those building blocks, then they're not going to be able to build with those building blocks. And a lot of times the cities, they have a standard detail of what is an arterial street, what is a collector street, what is a residential street. And when you go look at those standard cross sections, they might not even have sidewalks on their standard. What is an arterial road? May not even have a sidewalk on the side of it. And so that sidewalk is not going to get built when they do an arterial road if it's not part of their standard detail. And so I really think that we need to go back to a lot of the roots of when we started classifying these roads and adding these standards into our design. What a big issue is that here in San Jose is we have a lot. Well, it's a good thing in San Jose. San Jose was built very much with the car in mind from the beginning. All of our roads are wide. I know a lot of Denver is built this way as well. And so we have a lot of real estate to adjust, but that real estate's got to come from someplace. Is it going to come from behind the property line or behind the side, back of sidewalk from the property line? Is it going to come from the sidewalk? Is it going to come from the road? You know, and we don't have a lot of space sometimes if we built out all the way up to the property line. So then it starts to come from the road. And so we're dealing with a lot of those conversations now about road diets, about building density and more. But where in a lot of other cities, they may get that real estate from behind the sidewalk. There may be extra space there. They may get that space from some other means that they can add that kind of stuff while still maintaining the multiple lanes of car infrastructure. You know, and so it varies if you're in a very urban area or if you're in a more of an urbanizing area. But I think we need to get down to the actual detail. I don't see anybody doing that, which is a big problem. The Altas, the Tools, and Nelson Nygaards, they do master plans with big, thick lines on paper, right? Showing big, thick, like this is an intersection or this is a big corridor, but they're not actually doing the standard details that the engineers need. And I feel this a lot because for the last 10 years, I've been inheriting their master plans, and I've been having to be the bad guy to tell people, hey, this doesn't fit. You know, what did you propose? Like you said, we could do all this, and I end up being the person who has to compromise the bike lane, which I don't want to do. And I really wish that when they did these big master plans, they gave me the building blocks that I need to say, no, that's a standard. We're going to do a protected corner. We're going to do two curb ramps per corner. If I had those standards underneath me as a young engineer, I could have been doing that. But I really felt my hands were tied by not having those standards, but having all these pie in the sky ideas. And there was a gap missing. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I felt that it was a big struggle for a lot of engineers. I felt it in San Jose, and I know areas that are less urban are going to start feeling that as they start working on this kind of stuff.
Here in Harlem, they have a document that gives the order of priority on the use of public space on the street. So this is like recently released as part of their Vision 2040 plan. They basically say anytime there's a new project and there's, you know, outside of the immediately needed space, we have priority one is green infrastructure. So basically places to plant greenery, places for, you know, that you let flood, right? Places that can soak up water, places that can provide shade. Then you have mobility, starting with pedestrians, then cyclists, basically everything else, and then drivers. And then at the very, very bottom is car parking, right? So that I thought that was interesting because when you get into situations, you know, in Harlem where, you know, you're trying to fit everything in, well, Harlem itself has a very handy guide you can refer to and says, well, according to the city of Harlem, the first thing that has to go is your car parking. Sorry, I'm not the bad guy. That's what the city of Harlem said, and that's literally in their orders of priority.
Yeah.
So how do we get that here? You know, what's missing? We've done master plans, we've done general plans, we've done multimodal plans, we've done Vision Zero plans, right? But we're not attacking the classification. Like who's holding that up?
I think a lot of it just comes down to local leadership because I think that a lot of maybe city councils and the local bodies like the metropolitan the metropolitan planning organizations, they have a lot more power I think than they let on because you have cities like Carmel and Indiana where somehow they were able to turn all of their signals into roundabouts within 10 to 15 years, but
Mm.
that takes somebody at the local level having a lot of political energy to start this kind of effort, and then they'll work with the proper kind of engineer. So I think the first side of the equation is you need to have very motivated local political leadership with a clear vision, right? On the other side of the equation, you need talented professionals, right? And I think, and I mean, I talk about this a lot. I read an article about it, but I think one thing engineers need is a lot more education on this kind of things because we only take so many transportation classes, and we have a lot more. That's one reason why I went to the Netherlands is because I wanted to get that transportation knowledge that just wasn't offered at the university level for me.
Yeah, I think the university is really lacking. I got a master's in transportation engineering, and I got the master's when I actually was training another engineer. So the engineer, there was an engineer that I was training that was my right hand person. I was right above them, and we both were getting the masters together at the same time. And I remember sitting in class, and we're doing a geometric class and doing stuff, and I was like, "Hey, don't write that down. I'm going to train you better when we actually have to do that project," because the teacher was teaching some nonsense. And I was like, no, we're working on a real project right now. You can't do what you just learned in class. We're going to do it differently when we get back to the office. And so there's a lot of this unlearning. I had one of my transportation professors, he would advocate for multiple driveways at gas stations so people could skip intersections and get around there. And he would advocate for more parking and hated bikes. And when I would ride my bike to class, he would make fun of me and be like, "Oh, you're going to get run over someday." And I was just like, I eventually had to like sit down with him and work with him. And then over the years, when I ended up building the bike lanes around the university in front of the engineering building, I put a two-way bike facility with a bus boarding island right in front of the engineering building. And he came out there one day and he was like, this is nice. This actually works. Like, this is what I've been talking about. I was like, no, you haven't been talking about this. But I think his perspective was like, he hadn't seen that before. He wanted something totally separate. He didn't like how bikes were dashed and in the lane. And he was that his concern and his mentality, and I know it's hard for us to comprehend as people who bike and walk, but his mentality was, okay, I'm going to say something very backwards right now, right? Okay, but his mentality was, why are we spending so much taxpayer money if they can go injure themselves? We need to create facilities that are extremely safe so that and then they can encourage. And I was like, I had to kind of peel back at that for years to kind of get what he's trying to say. But there's definitely a very highway and roadway mentality that is there, and it has a lot to do with safety. But if we have safe, clear facilities that are easy for people to use, then I think a lot of people will get behind that. A lot of people will get behind roundabouts with separate bike paths, total separate bike paths on a freeway interchange. A lot of people will get behind that, but it's still not unlearning the big car dependency that we have. And so we need to talk about how to get rid of that car dependency. And I think it has a lot to do with how people's homes are and where they're located. A lot of people feel that they can't live without a car. But I think for the elderly aging population, the boomer population, we really need to show them that living alone in a house far away from the city is not the most cost effective and easy way for you to live, and there could be a better, more dense area where your things are more accessible, right, to you in an aging community. And I think though that generation is what's holding back a lot of this stuff, and us as a next generation, there's also a lot of engineers that in my generation who just learned from them, and are still holding up those theories. One of which, and Adam, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on this is has to do with traffic signal engineers and traffic signal costs. Different cities have different costs on traffic signal poles, push buttons, and equipment, depending on which company lobbied to get their signal pole bought by that city. right? And so San Jose uses a certain company, and in San Jose, it costs upwards of $500,000 to $1 million just to touch and modify a signal because of how entrapped we are to the poles, to the electrical boards, to the software, right? And some other cities where maybe there's more in-house signal engineers, they may hardwire things themselves and keep things cost effective if they can, right? But for a lot of cities, they get stuck with certain big private products, and signal timing, signal software, signal equipment is an extremely costly thing in our infrastructure. And I feel like a lot of young engineers who got all excited about doing signal timing and using signal equipment are stuck in with certain companies and certain products, and they can't unlearn that because it's so embedded into the city's infrastructure.
Yeah, I don't think we have much here, like in like sole source kind of equipment. We're just
Hmm?
seeing really incredible supply chain lead times on signal equipment, and so we have a few projects that are being held up. Still just haven't gotten the deliveries of stuff yet. But we do get quoted for like $500,000 per signal just to fix them up. So it does become tough. Here in New Haven, we actually have a separate traffic department than the engineering department. We both kind of sometimes work in tandem on projects. But I think going back to what you were saying before about traffic signal engineers and standard details and stuff, the engineering profession is really amazing because you don't need specialized knowledge, particularly in something, because we have all these manuals and guidelines kind of follow a process. I don't have much experience with structural stuff, but I could follow a process and design, a halfway decent frame. The problem is all of our transportation guidelines and manuals are very car centric in nature and quite outdated. And so, for example, there's another town in Connecticut. They're trying to redo their entire downtown to make it more like a village feel, more pedestrian friendly, less car oriented. And they want to put in bike safety and more bike lanes, and they're designing these paint only 5-foot bike lanes in between travel lanes and parking lanes because that's what the MUTCD says is acceptable, is you can have door zone bike. So yeah, there is a big deficit of engineers who are familiar with good design either through their own lived experiences or just seeing it done elsewhere. That's what we're kind of finding here.
And then you have to stop you from just giving up at the intersection altogether, right, Vignesh?
Yeah, and this is my plug for that manual. Don't give up at the intersection. But I work with a bunch of engineers all over the country to put that together because that manual is lacking of what we can do at the actual intersection. And that project was done through a lot of research from us trying different things in San Jose with posts and paint and those two-stage turn boxes. And I'm a big advocate for those two-stage turn boxes. I have more videos I have planned to talk about how to use those things. But I think teaching people how to cross in two stages and encourages more types of users. I have learned a lot over the years that I have to design for two types of cyclists. I have to design for the more family and children riding to school, people with groups who are hanging out and chatting side by side. And I also have to design for the hardcore cyclists or the e-bikes that go very, very fast. And so that's become a newer thing that we've been thinking a lot about is because we have a lot of those e-bikes that go everywhere and they are used by all ages and abilities now. A lot of these e-bikes, mobility scooters and more. We see a lot of these Segway go-karts. I don't know if you've seen those, but they go around downtown to the protected bike lanes and the crews of those. And so thinking about these different, these new modes is exciting, and it keeps the industry keeps us on our toes. But I think dealing with the intersection is a big thing for a lot of people. They want to bike. They want to bike to the park with their kids. They want to bike to the Starbucks. But there's like one intersection where it just feels very uncomfortable for them. And that is blocking them from using the entire network. And it could just be one crossing. It could just be waiting at one corner. It could just be how long they have to wait on a skinny sidewalk with a push button. But that is holding them back from a lot of this stuff. And I add one more thing is from an engineering perspective, a lot of engineers like to give up at the intersection because they like to leave the liability onto the user. It's much easier to do that than to actually develop a design and be held responsible for adjusting it and maintaining it. And a lot of engineers would rather leave the bike lane dash because then it kind of trains people to be on their toes, but it discourages a lot of people from using the facility. That's why we do a lot of quick build projects, but even I've learned through the years that quick build is not appropriate for every location. And how to approach quick build is very different in different types of communities. And so I've learned a lot about that kind of tactical trying things out and taking things back and parking loss and more. But I think quick build is a good solution for intersection development, but it has to be done tastefully.
I've been getting a lot of questions on my chat. I just wanted to maybe put one or two of them out to you guys. This one's kind of relevant. And someone asked, do you guys think the future revised MUTCD, so MUTCD means manual of uniform traffic control devices. Do you think those revised regulations are going to help decenter the car in the future, or do you think it's going to hurt it more? The MUTCD is kind of like the traffic design Bible in the US. It's the rule book we all use.
So I can speak to one of those. In the current MUTCD, it says you cannot have a bike lane like to the right of a right turn only lane because that's a conflict. And if you look at places like the Netherlands, where they have separated bike lanes on the far right side everywhere, they have protected intersections, they have signals that help you get through the intersection. And so that's why you see a lot of in the US, like I have to call them the gauntlet style bike lanes, where it's kind of threaded between like the through lane and the right turn only lane. You have to kind of squish yourself in between vehicles. The new MUTCD does allow for bike lanes to be put on the side of the road, provided you have appropriate signal facing, which is the way it should be done. It's the way that like Boston and Cambridge are doing it a lot. So yeah, I think knowing that we have these manuals that people are looking at every day and designing too, that people start to see like, oh yeah, look, we can do more stuff. I think to Vignesh's point before, with giving up at the intersection, I think a lot of engineers just don't know how to design the intersection properly for bikes. They just try to treat it like a vehicle lane and say the intersection is big open space. Here's your stop line, figure it out. So I think the new update will help a lot. It got an incredible amount of comments from the public to try to make it more inclusive of all different types of modes of transportation.
I think it's also just really important what Vignesh is doing with those standards, and also you have groups like NACTO that are kind of challenging the status quo a little bit. I mean, they don't necessarily come up with the rule books, for like the MUTCD does, but at least they provide some kind of guidance and research. So, when you have a new engineer who wants to do something new and exciting, and then the manager says, well, do you have an example of a previous project, because we don't want the liability. Now you have an organization called NACTO. We can be like, well, this is part of the NACTO design guide, and it has X amount of research behind it. It's been trialed in 10 different locations. So it's like, I think that work that NACTO is doing by doing those pilot projects, right, is also going to help quite a lot with those engineers who give up at the intersection.
Yeah, when I was at the NACTO conference, I got invited to a secret MUTCD meeting. And in that MUTCD meeting, there was people from the Fed who were there. But the people who were from the Fed were, to be honest, they weren't as knowledgeable about any of the stuff that we were doing. They were just there wide-eyed, kind of listening to what everybody had to say and kind of taking it all in. And then they were going to, in the meeting, they were like, yeah, we're listening to what you all say, but we're going to come back. And they didn't really give us anything of what they were going to do. But they saw examples from every city in the country of what they've been doing. And so they were very much exposed to that. And so I do see us getting there. What is a big problem is building blocks. Like when there's a new standard details comes out, or Caltrans updates something, or MUTCD, all the engineers in the country go and they read all of that to figure out what am I supposed to do with my work, right? But when it comes out from NACTO or some other guideline from the internet, it's just like, it's more of like a cool research thing that they go look at to be like, oh, that's a neat, I don't have to do that, but that's cool that they're doing that over there, and it has to come from the standards. And but that's not happening fast enough. I've been waiting for AASHTO's bike guide for years. I reviewed it 5 years ago, and it still has not come out yet. And it's been in their review over and over again. And even when I reviewed it, it was missing a lot of stuff that I already designed, like stop signs. It didn't have anything to do. Stop signs wasn't even in the book at all. I asked that, and I stunned everybody in the room when I asked that. I was like, "What about stop signs?" And everybody in the room was like, "Oh, whoops," you know. And so, like, it's lacking. And so, I really think these days a lot of it has to come from the community. Sadly, I think that it's been going on for so long. Us engineers there's a lot of us who are young, and we're all talking to each other in this space. We have our limitations, you know. I'm sure, Adam, you have your limitations. I have my limitations as well. And I think a lot of it has to come from the community through social media and more. I think we're in that kind of time right now. Um, I'm a big advocate for when we do outreach, we don't pay the consultant and we don't have the city staff, but we actually pay community-based organizations to figure out what we want to do. That way, the knowledge is not going away with not in the staff, and staff has turnover. It's not with the consultants where there's even more turnover. It's with the actual community. And so I think there's a lot of these kind of facilities that we will get. I made a video recently about the center running bike lane in Oakland. It was a cool idea. It wasn't executed well at all, but it was a very cool idea, and that was because there was a community. If you guys, I don't know if you guys saw that video, but I'll explain it real quick. Is there's a group of kids called the Scraper Bike Team. They've been riding for many years. They ride with wheelies in the middle of the street. And the city was going to put a regular bike lane, but then that would be a ticket to all the kids about how they ride. And so working with the community, working with everybody there, they came up with a different kind of facility. It was a good try to kind of make it so that everybody was aware that a bike could be in the middle of the street instead of just a share-o. So it's supposed to be a better way of showing people that a bike will be shared with traffic by putting this big art piece in the middle of the street. It was a cool idea, but that's not going to be the same facility that works in every place in the country like that. So every single community you work with will need to be brought in, talked about, and maybe you might have something custom, something unique, something that people are proud of riding on. And I've seen a lot of interesting custom stuff in the street. And I think that's where we're headed. You know, in San Jose, next to the Shark Stadium, we put a bike lane with a big shark mouth and like a fin on the back of it, you know, to represent the San Jose Sharks. You know, when we went near a trail, we put a little, in Emeryville, we have a share the road symbol on the trail, and we put that also in the street to kind of carry the same character and style through the city. So I really feel that that's not going to come from standards. That's not going to come from the Fed or the state. That's going to come from the ground up. You know, from people bringing in and saying, this is what we need, and this is our symbol, this is our style, this is our language. And so I think with Biden's new infrastructure bill and its equity-based focus, I really think a lot of the funds will go towards facilitating these conversations in the community to elevate good, unique, custom designs for each and every community. But from a roadway perspective, engineers freak out at that. They're like, "Oh my God, the MUTCD is not going to be. It's going to be slightly different when you go from one town to the other town. One town will use green posts, another town will use brown posts, another town will use yellow posts." And so I think we engineers need to filter that. It's our responsibility to talk to the community and figure out what that custom solution is, but also talk to the engineers and the state and be like, we're still using a double wide line. Everything is behind a double wide line. I'm still using this right reflectivity. And I think there needs to be that translation that happens, but it's got to come from the ground up in the future.
It's almost like I feel like sometimes our profession is more like bricklaying. Sometimes like it's more done like a trade than a hard science, because it's like you have this is the bricklaying manual, right? This is how we've always done it. You know, you follow these steps, right? But we don't necessarily have access to all the science and the research and the theory that would lead you to perhaps different results. And I think that we're slowly kind of transitioning more to transportation and engineering being practiced more like a science, you know, than what's the word I'm looking for? An artisan trade or something like that. I find the concept though of using kind of unique local things to be extremely interesting, because I think that's one of the best ways you can get the community buy-in for the support you need for projects like that. Because yeah, you know, a lot of people, even in the U.S., have probably never in a protected bike lane before, and all they might see is you want to take away a car from me, and if the car is the only way of getting around, you can sort of understand how someone could react really hostilely to that. Just in the Netherlands, when they started putting in the first proper bike lanes, the shop owners would hire contractors to tear out the bike lanes overnight. You guys, if you think we have bad pushback in the U.S. and the Netherlands, they were tearing out the asphalt overnight and just undoing all the work. So
Mhm.
yeah, I really like the concept of using like that local art and more like local culture to get the kind of buy-in, Vignesh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's,
I'll go for it.
oh, you're good. I just wanted to add a couple things just to the, just kind of like back to just two seeds of like things that I've seen work really well here in Denver and in other places related to grassroots and community, just getting more involved. And this is something I've been doing since 2011, but it just lots of experimenting, but specifically, hosting events with elected officials, because to your point, kind of the gatekeepers, or the where a lot of the pressure can be had within a city or a state. So having elected officials live these things, and putting your efforts towards, like, sometimes the Zoom and the committee meetings are great, but putting effort and energy, advocacy energy, community energy towards hosted experiential events, where actually, and then I love what Dismobility in Seattle has been doing for years around a 2-week commitment to not drive a car for elected part there. Elected officials have to, they sign up, they go through, and then it's a community thing. There's a community of elected officials kind of like, oh, we're doing this together. And it's like, it's a part of their just putting their name out there, and the reactions to what they learn within that 2 weeks are so tangible, are so, because elected officials are busy. They have a lot of places to go all the time. And they're caught every day with kind of the gaps, but they're also inspired because they're learning with their colleagues and they're disseminating that information down. I really want to try and do a local kind of Front Range here in Colorado version of that 2-week without driving commitment for elected officials. But it's city and state folks. So knowing your state representatives, knowing your city councilmen, and hosting these events with planners and engineers, it's such important, so that it's in the body, it's felt knowledge. It's not just conceptual, or it's not just an idea. It's not just another thing on a list in a room. It's lived. And it's like, you just can't replace raw experience, both the positive of experiencing a protected bike lane and the chaos of just the equitable rawness of the millions that can't drive. And the other thing I'll just add is participatory budgeting. Phyllis, who's in my chat here, is an advocate with me with Pedestrian Dignity, and she's been inviting elected officials and hosting these events. She's on a powered scooter, and because of her activism as a resident, specifically within public housing, she's been invited to be a part of a long form process, which is now being voted on for $400,000 of sidewalk access improvements surrounding her public housing location. And so the greater community is voting that in, but it's a really specific example of the more our, and that's kind of sometimes where it's like, how are the systems like our city of Denver putting time and effort into create a participatory budgeting process, and then we're putting our energy into the communities to organize and have people to be a part of that process. So it's like, how, like, the question of people within the system, how am I disrupting inside of these spaces, and how am I, but also community organizing themselves and putting the pressure so that, like you said, those building blocks are up to speed. Anyway, yeah.
There's also an interesting concept, Adam. Maybe you can tell me if they have something like this in your department. And sometimes in the Netherlands here, what they'll have is they have expert groups for certain things. So I worked on a train station once, and it's called the station of Bake Elslo in the south of the Netherlands. And one thing we had to do is we had to design all the guidelines for blind people who have to go to the station, right? And one part of the gemeentes or the city's process was to send our plans to a expert group that specializes in accessibility for disabled people. And so it turns out we made some errors in our design, and they actually said, so we like the base of it, but you guys need to adjust all of these things here and here and here. And it was fantastic because it was a relatively cost effective way, to have the actual, to use a consultant, because I work for a consulting company, and the gemeente just brought on, a small local group who specialized in this kind of thing, and they said, we just had to make some adjustments to the design. So instead of building it and then adjusting it, we got that feedback in advance. And then now going into the future as an engineer, I now know better how to design those kind of facilities. And I was wondering, Adam, do they have anything like that in your department where you might have like an accessibility expert, with American style infrastructure and being like, hey, have you considered this, or this?
No, unfortunately. Yeah, all we have are standards. We have ADA regulations, we have PROAG regulations, and we have certain details for the design of roads and sidewalks. But unfortunately, yeah, we don't have those. Send projects up to the DOT for review. They have their roadway unit and they have their traffic unit, and that's it. We don't have groups, unfortunately.
I've seen it happen a couple. I've seen it. San Francisco had a group that dealt with new ADA, and it was like kind of like a commission. But I've only seen it in San Francisco. There's like they have bike ped commission, and they have like an access and mobility commission. I'm on my VTA where I sit as a citizen advisory committee. That committee used to be mostly folks from the disabled or other visually impaired, and now that group is a combination of experts from many different things. But in the beginning, when it was first created, it was a lot of folks who were advocating for that and paratransit. So we have certain groups that we can talk to, but no, we don't have like a standard access mobility commission, which is a really good idea for a lot of cities to have, which is a combined of folks who either are having lived experiences or people who have influence or more to be on this group that does review of a lot of this kind of stuff. And that way it's a place for engineers to go check in with. I think that's really important for any city to do. At the end of the day, I'm going to like a lot of Gen Z humor has to do with the concept of an NPC, right? And I think this is very interesting because, like, at the end of the day, our world is our user interface in the video game of life. If it's a simulation, right? And we have to drive, we have to walk, we only have 2 hands, we have 2 feet, right? We have 2 eyes, but we still have to go press the button. We have to wait. This is how our user interface works, right? And so, I think at the end of the day, we don't have a group that talks about how to use the user interface, especially from somebody who need, that's their necessity. A lot of times I think about who the design user, who's the design user we're designing for, and our design user we've designed for was one for economic growth, which was an able-bodied person, typically a man who drives a car, who has a cell phone, who has a wallet, right? And that's typically our design, a person we're designing for, which is holding off, which is if you think of the bell curve of everybody, if you're only designing for the able-bodied person, then a lot of other people are being left to sidelines. And so thinking about a different user, maybe our new user is somebody who is visually, maybe they're in a wheelchair, maybe they don't speak the language, maybe they're going through some sort of episode right now, right? And maybe they don't have a cell phone that's charged. Maybe it's at nighttime and it's dark, right? And if we design for that type of user to get on the train, to get to the bus stop, to walk down the street, so they're well lit, right? Then we actually can, then anybody can use that facility, right? And so thinking about who is our new person we're designing for, I think is critical. And I think having a group to advocate for that would be very helpful for doing a lot of projects. San Francisco called on this group once. It was very interesting, actually. I remember being part of these conversations. It was for doing a bike lane on a sidewalk where they're on the same level, right? And how do you figure that out, figure it out, right? And what type of facility would go on the in between to tell people that it's on the same level? And so they went through a big trial of doing some of those longitudinal strips and bumps and stuff like that. And what they came up with was a trapezoidal unit. It still hasn't come out all over the country, but it's a small trapezoidal unit that can tell you that, hey, you're getting into like a bike lane facility. This is very different than we didn't want to do the longitudinal strips along that because they don't want someone who's visually impaired to walk right in between the bike and pedestrian facility the whole way. And so they came up with this little bump. And so I think we need to have groups like that to develop these new ideas and standards. I know nationally there is a group that does that. That's how we have so many different types of curb ramps over the years. Pedestrian dignity, I'm sure you've seen curb ramps that have score lines on them that they were made once upon a time to point you in the direction so you just follow that line and you gun across the road and hopefully you end up on a curb ramp on the other side. But that has since been ruled out in a lot of ADA ramps. Or in California, we used to have the 4 score lines behind an ADA ramp that would go all the way around it, and there'd be a bunch of 4 score lines. And we actually took that out recently, which I thought was a little weird because I thought a lot of people got used to that type of facility, but we took that out recently. So there definitely needs to be a board, not just on a national level, on the local level, so we can have this ground roots kind of thinking. But we don't have that right now. And I don't know. I don't know how we're going to create that. I think it would only happen if there's some sort of like mobility access plan that calls on creating some sort of body as a policy measure to be added to that, or part of the Vision Zero plan added in saying, oh, part of the Vision Zero, we're going to add a policy to create this group. But that needs to be part of these plans to push for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And positions to budget for paying residents, like you said, users that really diversify and it's a story of inclusion, like related to they're paid, you apply, there's childcare, there's translation, you're investing in the community being able to fully participate. It's like really doing it in a way where dignity is at the center of like one's need to be able to get to those meetings and participate easily and comfortably. And and I think that you'll just, because I've sat on some of the committees here in Denver, and I know it's different everywhere and it's never going to be perfect, but I'm in the room with the same 10 people, 90% of them are retired. Everyone's like, knitting and like, what do I think about sidewalks in the city? It's like, God, like you drove here. You don't need to walk on the sidewalk. This is 3 hours educated on stuff that like somebody is living and literally getting run over in the intersection. This is a waste of everyone's time. Everyone. We're not doing anything. Like we need to like, so it's one of the things. I'm getting loud, but like it's like that space that you're bringing up, Vignesh, around like the grassroots, investing in it, users that tell the raw, honest need story, and it'll be better for all of us. And what I'm seeing is as residents here, at least within our network, are participating, the elected officials are way more engaged because they're being co-guided by these very residents that have a completely different day-to-day lived experience. And so not only is the elected official and the planner, we had an engineer managing one of our state arterial roadways on our event this last spring. For 25 years was the lead engineer of this entire corridor. 60% of the corridor has no sidewalks, dirt, bus, and it's not just their fault, but for 25 years, you're managing a corridor and the engineer what you're saying is they're just given blocks and they're building bricks. And so, but they and the elected officials were we're so much more engaged because the residents who have night and day lived experiences, night and day, like this is not a choice. This is not an activity. This is not, I'm going to go get ice cream. I mean, you might get ice cream, but like, it's not about getting ice. It's like,
You can buy a
this
banana.
is, you can get the banana. It's just like, people are actually dying out here. And the dying is holding the hands of racism and classism. And this is, and able, like, it's just, this is where, like, the crisis of it around how we advocate and bring our activism energy, not just to be loud and disruptive, but to ground it. And like, who are we building this for?
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
and this is where it's, and I think there's just there's a lot more room to just be creative with our, both inside the systems, but I think with our elected leaders and with these committees, who's on these committees, how are they getting supported, how do they represent the different raw stories, the real stories, the stories that aren't just walking or biking or transit as choice stories, when it's and how is not just disruption for the sake of disruption, but how are we constantly grounding it in all these meetings, in all these exchanges, grounding it. Because we can't, and as so many Gen Z, as so many people on TikTok here connect to my account, at least through the climate reality, it's just like, we can't sustain it. we can't sustain it. So if we're going to be serious about mental health, the USA is so divided and toxic, right? I mean, if we're going to be serious about social healing and connection, this is so much more than just pavement and budgets and whether or not you want your lane taken away. This is about our survival. And so we're going to do some educating on social dynamics, on social capital, on hyperlocal business, on the millions of people that can't drive. Like, how we speak about these things is so important, I think, as teachers and professionals and everything. Like, it's just, we got to get into the heart and the guts and feel our way into this as well. We need, anyway. There's my.
Oh, I love it. That's
Well, I want to
exactly what.
ask a question to Adam, kind of on that. So, Adam, as being a city engineer, what is the best way an advocate can come at you to get things done? You know, is it going to the commission and committee meetings? Is it drawing something and coming and yelling at you? Is it just beating your chest about bike lanes? Like, what is the best way for an advocate to kind of make things happen?
Should they make a TikTok video about your project, or?
Yeah,
Is it just more?
yeah, it's like contacting us directly.
Is it just more TikToks?
Ideas that people,
right?
We have multiple public meetings when we propose projects and have concepts, and when we have those meetings, we save the chat, we go back and read it later. Oftentimes it does, like, the same people showing up, and we kind of know, like, what the community wants at this point because they keep asking for specific things. But yeah, like, we work for the people, right? We tell us what you want to see, and we try to incorporate it. Yeah, if they want to, I would love for our residents to send in, like, street mixes for potential roads. Like, I'd love to see that, because oftentimes it's us that have to come up with the design. We're just the engineers. We're not the ones who actually live in the community. So it's super important that people in the community tell us, like, this is what we want to see here. So it's not just us kind of being like, hey, how about this? How do you like that?
Mm-hmm. I was hoping you'd say that is getting people to come to these meetings and participate in the way that it's documented as part of the process, and Pedestrian Dignity, I know you've gone to a lot of these meetings, the same people that show up, and we need to get more people to be involved. And so what are we doing wrong as consultants or as city, of not getting enough people? We have 3 meetings on a project. We have a website sometimes, right? We have what else we do? We reach out to people 500 feet from the project, but that's it. We don't do more than that. In my opinion, there's so much more that we should be doing. I found that putting a lawn sign with a QR code or a phone number gets more people to participate in that than the 500 feet from the project because people are walking, people are driving, people are biking, they see it, but we don't put signs up, to tell, hey, a project is happening here, participate. We don't, social media is not done in a great way by cities, for people to come in. I've live streamed when I'm doing my meetings because I know it's public. I asked them, they said I can live stream, so I've been live streaming it so people see it's really easy to participate in that. But we really need more people to come to these meetings. They're easily accessible, they're on Zoom these days, you can call in, you can send in your information early on. But we need more of that, but I don't think people know about it. And that might be our fault, for not getting to them where they are. So I'd love to think about more ways of how can we get more people to come to the meeting. And I want everyone's opinion. I want people who also are car centric to come to the meeting. I want people who aren't your typical folks. Like I remember going to a meeting and I learned a lot. I lived in East Palo Alto for a few years. And East Palo Alto is a not the best neighborhood. It's not a lot of bike lanes, and there's a food desert. And there I learned, and there's not street lights, and there's potholes everywhere. And there I learned that a lot of people who bike, they bike opposite to traffic in the bike lane because there's no street lights, and they would feel safer biking opposite to traffic because then they can avoid the cars and the cars come at them. And that's very unique to there because of the poor design and the land use and the road. But now everybody's doing that, and so we wouldn't have learned that if we just had the same bicycle advocates come to every meeting. We only learned that when we went to the people and we brought in everybody who rode a bike and was like, you're riding a bike, come to this meeting, right? And so we need to do a lot more, but I'd love to think about, do you guys have other ideas of how can advocates participate? Stefan. So your
I
hand
was
raised.
one of the best things I ever saw was when we were working on a bicycle express route in the municipality. And what they did is they invited the local cycling group representative to join us in the meetings. So we basically had a live feedback from the local bicycle advocacy group. So it wasn't just the meetings, but when design decisions were being made, when route decisions were being made, they didn't necessarily have a veto, right? But we had someone in the room with us who could chime in and tell us about those people's lived experiences. And I mean, it's kind of like, a whole product life cycle. Like, you get direct feedback from the end user to then make a better design the next time, and you keep improving that way, right? So sometimes I don't think it's just about before a project, after the project, but I think during the project that could be one of the best ways to solve problems before they even arise.
Yeah.
Well, one person in the chat said a good idea is the meeting should not be before 5 p.m. to be on the city staff time. They should be in the evenings where more people have access to that. So that was a good point.
Yeah, or even going to the neighborhood where you're doing the project in. You can set up a tent, you can bring some food and drinks, make it a community event, bring the people who are actually going to be designing it. They're going to be redoing my street next year, and that's exactly what they did. They put a little pamphlet in everyone's mailbox with a QR code that led to a website. You could see all the project details, and then you would go to the meeting. That was literally 2 weeks from then. It was right outside. It was at like 6 p.m. and everyone from the city was there. The design staff were there. It was great, and everyone just gave their feedback.
Yeah, we had one of those events where we had a curb extension and we painted it, and we brought in paint and chalk for the kids to paint in the curb extension, and we had a little event there, and that was really, really, a lot of people didn't even understand how much benefit a curb extension would be for them to cross until they stood in it. And they were like, oh, I can stand here now? Wow, right? And so a lot of people just haven't even felt that experience before. They feel it subconsciously when they go to a nice neighborhood and they go to a not so nice neighborhood and they feel it. They don't know what it is. They don't know, oh, the crossing distance is shorter. Oh, the push buttons work. Oh, there's like landscaping. They just think, oh, that's where the nice people live, right? But they don't subconsciously feel that, hey, that's the dignity that they deserve in their own neighborhood. And yeah, people just need to experience sometimes that.
Mm-hmm.
John, you were saying, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good, man. Absolutely. Oh, I just think all these things. One of the things that I think there's just a lot of room for creativity around just 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 the rawness of building relationships with and especially just relationships with the communities. Like if you're saying that you're centering equity, what relationships do you have within these communities that you're kind of you're weaving this equity, like, and so if you don't have relationships, how do those relationships get formed with trust and time? And you may through those relationships realize that's not where you're not maybe going to do that project because the relationship has informed, like, we're not ready for it, or we don't have, like, you go into these relational building spaces with openness, like any relationship, without transactions. I think having like pre-planning budgets so that you have healthy stipend capacity for people who want to engage. You have, like what Vignesh, what you said earlier about having resources for someone within the neighborhood or community to be the weaver, a paid part-time position. Or sometimes I've seen it done where, and I think there could be more, where there's just unrestricted funding coming with the project for that community to create something that they want to create, whether it be benches or something out of their creative, like, world of what could, so you have this unrestricted space where it's just open to a community, like, over time co-deciding on where that money goes. So I feel like, and I just think the rawness of that relationship building. I think about all the meetings that happen every month at, like, public housing locations, at different community. I think about some of the breakfasts at these different, weekend adult daycare centers where a lot of refugee and immigrant communities kind of gather. Like, I think about different meeting gatherings where people are inviting you or inviting the community to be a part of what they're already doing and what they want. And so you're going into it with a genuine, like, I want to get to know you and I want to learn from you, and starting and seeing where that goes, related to then involving them or inviting people into the project. Because sometimes the harshness of, we have a project, we're coming in, this is what we want, there's kind of a lot of unspoken bypassing of the relationship. And so I think there's just room for creativity around how are our budgets becoming more open and flexible to invest in people who are open to engage through trust and genuine connection. And how is some of this money earmarked and left open for participatory budgeting, kind of like what we saw here in Denver with this project around public housing? There were several community members that they started inviting to these meetings, and they said, okay, we have $1 million within participatory budgeting that we're trying on for this year. And communities got involved. They partnered with Denver Housing, and they've got these amazing community-run initiatives now that are being voted on. But I just think there's room to break up some of the transactional elements of, come to us, this is what we're doing, we need your feedback, and we'll put some chips out. It's like, just creating with meeting people where they are, knowing that this may not happen in the timeline that I'm hoping for, preparing partners for that, and just really letting the relationship lead,
Maintaining relationships is really important, throughout the process. It's hard though. I think cities need to do that though. And especially nowadays, we're all creators here. So let's think about, like, in the new creator economy or whatever. A lot of people want to align themselves with a local advocate or a local champion, right? If there's a local block leader who's saying, this is what we need to do, or somebody on a project saying, this is what we need to do, or someone on social media, this is what we need to do, that brings up a lot. And so I think relationship building with folks is really important, to get everybody buy off, because people want to align themselves with something or someone. I've seen it happen in good and bad ways, though. I've seen, one time I worked on a project where we worked with a group and we worked with their local leader in part of the community. It wasn't me. The community outreach specialist worked with a local leader who was ran a big organization. And they got so excited by working with them that they actually quit their organization and became a community outreach employee of that organization. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, that was good, but now that community doesn't have a leader anymore, you know? And so now this person is doing the same outreach all over the country. So yes, it's good, but we did good, but we need to make sure that we keep the roots in the community, or better. It could have been approached. The outcome could have been better, but but we're always learning, you know. And I think this is a really important to have that outreach, social media, and more. Adam, how has your social media worked with your public works role?
I think mostly just in terms of kind of publicizing all the work that we're doing, informing people about certain projects that are going on, just getting people more interested about infrastructure in general. I think in terms of like the advocacy side of it, I usually try to keep like the work and play separate. There's a fine line I have to walk between being like a public official and someone who wants to see change, but is also the one kind of making it. But yeah, I think just out there about like, this is the types of stuff that you can see in your community, and hopefully inspire people to show up to public meetings or send in their comments and feedback.
Yeah, and John, how is your social media? How has it changed, or how is it affecting your role these days?
That's a good question. It's I don't know. It just ebbs and flows. I think the thing that's so tangible for me, so tangible. It's how the bridge of younger folks, mostly in their 20s, that connected through the accounts, that have connected more so. I mean, definitely, as you all have seen, I'm sure in your accounts, just people who are learning and trying things on in their community and thinking about things for the first time. But the most tangible thing that's happened for me is the bridge to civic engagement through the lens of mobility justice, or mobility like inclusion, this work that all of you or all of us are a part of in our own way. That arc locally, we're now half of the people who were on the Denver Deserve Sidewalks like organizing committee were people who that found or connected through the pedestrian dignity channels. These are and they're all, it's a younger audience. It was just, Denver Streets Partnership, our local organization, nurtured that, helped to train them through some of their programming, but the bridge, the access to it, the was through the social media spaces. So that gives me energy, like knowing that bridge can happen, where the civic part of the brain gets turned on through this lens, and that feels that feels really energizing when it happens. But the algorithms are so weird. I don't know. So I'm constantly experimenting.
Well, I think you hit a really good thing with the generation of I think about this NPC concept of like how your point of view of how you're using the infrastructure. And I think that's resonates with a lot of people these days. If they either been playing video games, or if they're just walking up and down the street, just seeing how you interact with everything and the way you approach things is really resonates with a lot of folks, because that's their lived experiences as well. And it's something the first time that they've heard somebody talk about, oh yeah, this is not how it should be, right? And some people just assume that that's just the way the map was made, And so, but it really doesn't need to be that way. I'm still figuring out what I want to do with the social media more and more. I think what I would like to do myself is I want to give people all the right vocabulary, terminology, knowledge, so that when they go to the meetings, they are well versed and they're able to participate like a lot of other folks. And that's my big thing. That's why I did the Drain Gang and other things. I'm trying different things to try and teach people about like, hey, there's an importance of drainage, and this is all the way the drainage affects you, right? And I'm trying different things. I have a bridge audio that I'm going to start using to talk about bridges, and I have a couple other audios that I want to start using to just kind of bring in more people so they understand the terminology. So when they click on the hashtags of, oh, what is a weir, or what is a dam, or what is a culvert, and they go and they can see more about a culvert. But and I'm trying to bring more of that, because I've seen so many times when I go to a meeting and you have a NIMBY who like did their research to fight the project, right? And then you have your like single disciplinary advocate who knows everything about one discipline but forgets about all the other disciplines. And then the other, you have a lot of people who just came and they're just like trying to figure it out. They're just kind of overwhelmed by everybody yelling at each other or talking about all these words, right? They just want to know, like they just want to trying to cross the street, you know. And you're talking about all these big big macro issues about volumes and safety and big maps of the whole city, like we planners and engineers think. And at the end of the day, they're just trying to talk about like one big tree or something like that, and or something in their neighborhood. And so there's a lot of I think my goal is to try to help more people participate, because I was tired of seeing the same people, the NIMBYs and the single disciplinary advocates coming to the meetings. But I think social media is very, very powerful, because we're bringing the conversation to them instead of them coming to us, right? And I think that's where I think where we're headed. I don't know if it's going to be a tech-based solution where it's an app and people go put in their stuff. I've seen a company who puts I forgot the name of that company. You guys might know them, but they have a AI that has texts, and they put the text of the phone number on the project, and you will have a conversation with the AI, and it would pull information about your needs are from the text conversation. So you don't need an app, you know, to enter in all those boxes and fields of your issues or answer the questions. You do it all through text, you know. And so there may be different forms of outreach that we need to get people involved. But I want to do. We got to figure out how to do it in the right way. I want to give an example of. I heard from a man named Rod Diridon, who was who built a Diridon station here in San Jose, and he helped build BART. And he told me kind of in private a little bit, or in a small group, about what he did to get BART built through the whole Bay Area. And what he did is he had a big group of advocates who were fighting for BART from all the different cities, and he told them to go to every single meeting, and they all prepped before the meeting. They all went to the meeting. The 40 of them went, and they all advocated all the different perspectives, and they were trained. And I thought about that. And I was like, how are we going to do that? You know, how are we going to train all these people to go participate? And I think that's why I turned to social media. You know,
watch not just bike videos. Watch not just bike videos on YouTube.
Yeah, no, that's a great channel, you know, because it's a great title and a great channel, because it just gives everybody the right perspective, and that's perspective I try to bring too a little bit. I will talk a little bit about car-centric design a little bit, talk about the ills of it, but I will still talk about it, you know. And so I think reaching to all these different people where they're at is where we're headed. But I'm still playing with how to do it right. It's a new world.
We actually have a question. I got a question from Not Just Bikes in the comment. I wanted to ask before it gets a little too late. So he's asking, what are the top 3 things you would advise an individual to do to improve their city? I mean, I would say number 1, watch Not Just Bike videos, because it's just a great starting point for learning about great design and what to do and what not to do, right?
I'd say going to the commission and committee meetings on the regular is a good one. If there's a topic you care about, whether it's safety, whether it's trees, whether it's bike ped, whether it is a transit, you know, just going to the regular meetings and just kind of listening in. You can just listen in on Zoom is a great starting point to figure out what's going on and what conversations are already happening. That way you can hear about the second meeting for the master plan or the second meeting for a certain corridor or something. I think another one is working with finding a local organization that's there. They could either be the bike ped organization or maybe a political organization in your town. Cupertino has a few different organizations, but I think that's a good one. And I think the last one is kind of a far-fetched one, but I've found that if you and it's maybe I'm saying this just from my perspective because I'm an engineer and I'm able to draw stuff. But I found that a council member or a politician, if they have to make a decision in that 2-3 minutes when they're up on stage on that agenda item, right? And they're blasted with a bunch of decisions all day. They have time to prep, but they still have to make a decision in that moment, right? And they need all the information that they can get. What they do is they let the public participate, then they have their discussion, right? And that's all they really have. And so if you can give them the material they need in short tidbit form, short form information, I think a memo explaining the impacts of the project, okay, an exhibit showing where the project is, and a rough cost speaks volumes for anything. I know it's hard for somebody to create that, but just having a little bit of that does so much to a decision maker to help make a decision. And I think those are probably my three main things.
Yeah, I would say
I would agree with all of that. But go ahead.
Yeah, when you think about like trying to improve your, it's easy to get a little bit overwhelmed because you think about, oh, my entire city, how do I improve that? Like this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Start with like the block where you live, and like devote time to go out and really like take a microscope to your block. Like, what do I specifically like about this, and what do I specifically not like about this? And then next time you move to your city, you'll have like a more trained eye to kind of see like what's working and what isn't. And if you start on the block where you live, you know you're most familiar with that area, and so you can really get some specifics, and you can tell your town what to do or not. And I guess number two, I don't know if I have a third one. Number two would be, if you're able, try moving through your city in a way that you're not used to. If you mostly drive through your city, go take a walk somewhere. Go ride a bike somewhere. Take the bus if you've never taken the bus before, and just get a different perspective and try to live how other people live, and see what works and what's not working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just second that for sure. The lived experience, I feel like, is so and I would just add an extension to that, just the practical trip piece. So if specifically if you're a car driver, like literally replacing trips for a month and in different conditions. So be intentional to replace it. Like if it's raining, go out. If it's at nighttime, go out. Winter, like diversify your lived experience related to your mobility and really paying attention to your sensory. So your mental health, your physical health, in terms of how does it feel? What does it smell like? What is it? So the sensory and the relationship to place and space with your practical trips to the grocery store. What do I do? I can't buy as much, or what do I do with this extra weight? What are the bus times? So learning those systems from a practical, like very practical. If it's across town, all right, how do I protect that much extra time in my day? And what do I have to say no to and yes to get to those destinations with that lens of millions of people can't drive a car. And so that like, so I just really like that feels like such an important thing, getting into just the care of a community and nurturing from this place. The other thing that I'll just add is just the research of, do I know who my council members are? Do I know who my state representatives are? Do I know the difference and what they influence? So the different elected leaders within my district. So just taking that time to just do that research. And then with that, just practicing using the tools that these systems have now to report gaps or to make comments or to, so you're just practicing, like, so that way the next time you're moving through a space and you see something problematic, you know who you want to reach out to, and you know who you want to pay attention. You want your electeds to pay attention to this, and you want to use the system at least already in place to report it, and you can do that pretty quickly, and you can quickly tell other people to use those things as well. So maybe the third thing then is just to invite 5 of your peers to do the same thing. Invite them to come with you, and invite them to use those tools and to educate them. Do a TikTok on it. Tell people about it.
Yeah, those are all really. I mean, I agree with all of those. I think maybe if I would could think of another unique idea, I would call it guerrilla urbanism, where it's like you kind of go out to kind of challenge the status quo. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about only doing safe things. So, for example, one of the best instances I ever saw, close to where I live in Harlem, there's this beautiful canal, and there's the whole canal is like has double car parking on either side. So the right side of the canal is double car parking, the left side of the canal is double car parking. And one day, two or three of the car parking spots were blocked off with tables and benches. Someone had just gone out and put tables and benches and chairs where the car parking spots used to be, just to show people like, hey, this is one of the most beautiful parts of the city. Why are we just putting our ugly hunks of metal here? Let's try to reimagine that space with something new. And I mean, that's obviously, not putting anybody in danger if you do that. Or, in Delft, when they made the first bone nerfs, the living streets, the local community organized, and they basically would block off the street to like any through traffic. They were already really narrow streets, right? It's not like they were putting stuff down like a 9-lane strode through Los Angeles, right? They were putting planters and heavy objects, right, that you couldn't get past because they wanted to communicate to the city, this is what we want, and we're trying to show you a little more literally, what the space kind of could be. Yeah, so like I would say, like, doing kind of small artistic actions to kind of get people thinking about, like, what are other things we could use for this gigantic, car parking lot, right? Like if you could put a small playground there or something, or if you could have like a farmer's market or something like that. I've even seen great maps on LinkedIn made where someone showed literally what percent of a city was just made up by empty surface car parking lots, and they just said, yeah, this is what happened to our city, got destroyed by car parking. Literally, it's over 50% car parking. Yeah, basically that plus all of the other things that you guys said.
A lot of it is parking, and even yesterday, I actually I was started making a video. I was doing a cat tracking review of a project, and I made a video about how the cat tracking process works. And cat tracking is when I check the thin lines on the ground before we put the permanent lines. And I was reviewing it, and during that process, the whole block came out at me to argue about parking. Like the whole block, they started knocking on each other's door, and like they're looking at the street, and they started coming out there, and I had to. They understood the need of the bike lane. They were ready for it, but then they started talking about a lot of other ideas. They're saying, "Oh, what if we made this street into a one way?" And everybody in the block was like, "Yeah, if we made it into one way, you could still maintain the parking." And I was like, "That's kind of outside the scope of the project, but this is the city you can talk to. This is who the folks are, right?" And so people are intrigued. They want to participate. They have ideas. Maybe the one way there would have been a good solution for that block, right? But um, people just need to participate, and seeing these things, feeling these things is the first time that they were like, oh, let's talk about a change. It was the first time they thought about the one way, and they all collectively were like, the one way would be a great idea, right? And it was interesting because even the city was like, oh, that would be a cool idea, but that was the first time that they got the idea, was when they saw the marks in the ground. And so I think people really need to see, and that to for the brains to start thinking, and
I
yeah.
got one more. I got one that you just reminded me of. I think we should get cities to set up my second idea would be getting your city to do make a whole separate quick build department. So yeah, the concept would be, this is a department of the city that specializes in very small projects, like part of a neighborhood street, and these projects would be launched by neighborhood initiatives. So you would form a little local group, and then you would come to the quick build department. You would say, hey, we want a little extra park added along our street. We want less parking along our street. And then they would say, great, okay, we're going to use quick build materials. It'll take us a couple of days, couple of weeks to do. And we're going to make it temporary because we're going to see how it goes. And then, we can then decide, in a couple of months whether or not we want to keep it or not. And I think that, not just, just the changes in the immediate physical environment, but then getting people to start realizing that they can engage with the local community. There's actually something that will happen. You're laying the foundations for a lot greater community engagement in the future that can then lead to the big, local projects where you get a whole protected bicycle infrastructure, something like that. In the Netherlands, we call it Karen Mit's Pit. It's like this. It's the idea is you have you have this group. You have like 1,000 neighborhood groups across the whole country, and everyone pitches an idea, and then the best like two or three ideas wins, and they get fully funded, right? And then the city implements them. But those are like bigger project ideas. But yeah, I would say like if San Jose had a quick build department, and the max project can be $10,000, right? And we have the budget to do 100 of these. You guys can launch the initiative. One of you guys, is the volunteer project head, right? And you guys just keep doing that.
So Adam, why do you think we don't do something like that, or why do you think is it a good idea, or how do we make something like that happen?
I think that's a good idea. I know here we've done a little bit of quick builds through our traffic department. We had a consultant in street plans with Mike Lydon. He made a lot of like intersection narrowing, curb extensions kind of deal, and got the community to come out and help paint and put in the posts. Art there. That's a great idea. I'm not sure why more places don't do it. I think a lot of motivation community members can get to help change their communities just by seeing it first. And if you can use very cheap materials, maybe stuff that you already have, like people just need to go and see like, oh, this is what it could look like, instead of a whole series of meetings. We're going to spend a whole bunch of millions of dollars, and in a few years, people want to see what's possible now. And I think that's a great way to build support for more long-term permanent projects.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my theory of why it doesn't happen. I think it has to do with, I've seen it in a big city like San Jose. You have DOT, Public Works, Parks and Recs, Parks and Rec, and Planning, all fighting for something on curb and gutter, and they're all like different, right? Where I work with smaller cities where there's only one public works department and there's only 3 staff there, right? And they get a lot done. I'm going to give the example of Emeryville. John Boutiers is on Twitter, if you know who he is. He's the mayor of Emeryville. And I was on a panel with him, and I spoke to him for quite a bit. And the way they operate in Emeryville is very unique, where the whole city is on a quick build agenda, right? And if somebody runs over a post and posts on it on Twitter, John will send it to his staff, make the staff go put the post back out there, and then screenshot the email conversation about how it got done and tweet that, And so that's just very, very on the ground. And the reason that he's able to do that is because he's taking the blame. The mayor, the city is the one who's being the scapegoat, saying that we're trying this is why we're doing it, and more. Whereas a larger city, if you have all these different departments and you have a city manager and a council, right, then nobody's taking the blame for it, because it's such a multidisciplinary thing. Is quick build. You pave, you paint, you post, you sign, you signal, right? There's a lot of different disciplines all there, and sometimes that's beyond the DOT's what they can do. And so that's why it's like a separate action thing. When I worked for the city of San Jose, I had a very unique role because I worked for downtown. I don't even talk to you guys about that. I haven't talked about that yet too much, but I actually worked for the downtown operations as their engineer for parking. And there we did a lot of different things with many different disciplines, because we were just a small group of people managing the downtown. And I worked on the first time we put a zip car logo on the street. I worked on some of the first parklets on the street, and we did some of the first curb extensions, and we were able to do and try things out. And the downtown had a downtown association of business leaders and community advocates that was right in conversation with us about every event, every block party, every concert, and every marathon. And so that's how we were able to do this kind of quick build in the downtown hardcore, because we were able to manage multiple disciplines for the city. Whereas a larger city, it's there's so many different groups and that combat each other constantly, and that's kind of why a lot of things don't happen. But it really takes good leadership. A lot of city staff, they'll do stuff, they'll be like, oh, we have a new mayor or somebody new who's more into bikes, so I guess we're doing bike lanes now, and that's because the previous leadership wasn't, and so a lot of them are ready for it. It's just in terms of leadership and advocacy. And so Um, uh, Advocates have the real power right now. I think in the next few years, is that until we have mega corporations doing big things in cities, we might lose that power. But right now, I think advocates have a lot of power. But I've seen, because I work for some of the tech campuses out here too, and what's nice about the tech campuses is they want to do a lot of bike ped work because it has to meet their traffic demand goals, their VMT goals. So that's their interest. But when I work for developers that aren't in the tech industry, it's parking and road, and I have to do a lot of convincing as to I have to explain how they can get credits with the city for VMT, and it's something they don't even want to entertain, and so it's different conversations with different people is I think is the reason Quick Build department hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, it all starts with leadership.
Yeah, I've got a couple comments in here. Bernice is in my chat saying hello to everyone. Phil Ritz is here saying hello to everyone.
Hey, Phil.
A couple things. Just Bernice was just adding to the things to inspire change. I think all public meetings should post info on bus routes that pertain to that neighborhood. Zoning board member here. Most meetings are online or hybrid. Come show up to zoning board meetings. But I also want to. Bernice was saying related to the where is it? Related to the things you were just I can't see it in the Peoria, Illinois has an innovation team similar to Quick Build, and this makes me think of the role of, and even in cities, and Denver's not doing it at a scale I think they could, but to me it's an interesting opportunity when I see innovation teams or an innovation group within a city that is specifically tasked with that complexity. So you just have a team that is from the beginning curated to be doing these kinds of projects in the midst of all these like huge complicated departments trying to work together. And I've seen that work sometimes in Denver. We have it's called the Denver Area Active Living Coalition. That's technically a part of our Department of Transportation. And I feel like if they were even more upfront about some of the innovation work that they're doing, I think they would potentially get more done in some of that space. But I feel like it's just to name it as an innovation team or an innovation group within the department, I think could be really helpful for people across departments understand the work as a strategy and not just kind of these one-offs that disrupt or create kind of chaotic, because I've seen a lot of that where it's really chaotic in Denver, and it's hard. Anyway, y'all, I have to go at the hour. Just FYI, if I leave at in 5, that's just FYI.
No worries. Yeah, it's like
before you go, I have a question. Sorry, Stefan, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's like you have different city departments, and you literally need a small department to get the different departments to work together to actually get the stuff done. Right? Yeah.
But I have a question for all of you all. It's something that I've been dealing with a little bit more and more lately. Is this conversation of like inequity and gentrification? And I work with a lot of communities that have been forgotten for the last 40 years or purposely ignored for the last 40 years. They never had the sidewalks. They never had the green infrastructure. They never had the street lights. It's maybe not the best neighborhoods that a lot of people avoid. But there's people in these communities who are fighting for change. And they've been fighting for safer streets for years. And a lot of that previous generation of folks who were fighting for safer streets back in the 70s or 60s, they've given up. That previous generation has just said, like, it's not possible. And the newer generation is here. And the newer generation's arguments are different. There's a big concern of if you improve this neighborhood, you'll displace the people that are in the neighborhood. If you add the street lights, if you add the curb ramps, if you add in the bike lane, if you add in the sidewalks, it will make the neighborhoods nicer to the point that it won't be an affordable neighborhood anymore. And it's sad that it's sad that that's the conversation that we have to have, but it's a real conversation because of these areas have been ignored and forgotten for so long. And a lot of people in these communities, they would advocate for not doing this kind of stuff just to keep the prices low in the community, which I think I wonder what we can do to do it better. I helped by putting community art in the street or making it so it's by them in different languages, so it's by the community and for the community with the kids' arts from maybe local artists. I've worked with doing the unique things in them that are just for them, but in all, they have a point, you know. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you deal with that when we were talking about equity in these type of communities.
Yeah, I don't know. I just have a couple thoughts, but I face it all the time, Vignesh, with the work that I do and just moving communities. And it's why relationship to me is so important. It's why doing events and the participatory budgeting stuff is so important, from grassroots decision making, where a lot of local people are being supported to kind of organize together, you know, and with the consultant or a partner potentially, but the primary energy is within the community discerning. And what I see, where I don't see a lot of the some of the gentrification stuff show up as much, is when it's so heavily community led and its focus is on access and safety, family, kid safety, just traffic, generally just road safe. I mean, just so safety and access being the main, like, driving. I need to get to the store. I need to get home. This is where I live. But then it's also holding the hand of pressuring the system to commit to the full trip and not just piecemealing walkability projects, because when they turn into projects and little, like, for you know, these kind of micro, you know, so it in realistic speak, that may not happen for a while, but the languaging and the messaging is holding the hand and pressuring of a systemic change, so that it's
Mhm.
because I related a lot to, you know, power dynamics and white supremacy, and like when you have a dominant, like like when you have a dominant system and you treat pedestrian mobility and other transit like these, you know, then it's the fighting between, when really the main culprit is the larger controlling dominant. And so I just think there's the trusted relationships, and holding the hand of the systemic. We need our systems to represent all modalities, so that this isn't just picked up and piecemealed by whoever wants to make it into something that's not us. You know, and I think so anyway, I don't know. But I just think it's back to that grassroots community, as many community voices, and focusing on access and safety. But it's not that easy. And I experience challenges around that all the time. But I think the challenges are so important. The tension is really important.
Yeah, here in New Haven, if you want to talk about gentrification, we have an extremely low vacancy rate for housing here in New Haven. We do not have enough housing for the people that want to move in. And so because of our housing shortage, that's why you get people getting, the longtime residents getting displaced by people who can pay more. And a lot of that's due to all this surface parking lots that we have, and all these, you know, we have three different highways ripping through our city that went through some of the densest neighborhoods historically. And so we really have lost a lot of residential areas and housing to cars. What we find here is, though, you know, we make sure to try to do projects in every neighborhood. And a lot of our residents are asking for improvements, streetscape improvements, and welcome them. I don't necessarily think it's gonna, like, the bike lanes are gonna bring gentrification, but a lot of, like, these major roads that we're trying to redo kind of divided communities in the past and don't make it inviting for people to stay there. And so what we're really focusing on is trying to turn some of these big roads into more neighborhood level streets that tie the community together. And, you know, you can actually cross the street and feel like you're in your community and you're not crossing this chasm. side to the other. So yeah, I think transportation plays a very big role in keeping communities tight knit and welcoming, and keeping people that want to stay there a long time.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear that people are asking for it, and but the housing demand is what we're all feeling. I was just thinking, I had this conversation with someone someone from once, and he was like, he was advocating against putting a crosswalk because he was like, oh, it's going to make the neighborhood nice, and I was just like, man, like how do we fix that? But there's a lot of uphill battles that we need to fight. Uh, but no, but we have to continue to be. I think when it comes down, you have to head out. See you,
So
John.
good to meet you. Thank you. Sorry, I got to run.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day.
Likewise, y'all. Okay.
Not just Spikes is going to hop in actually for a couple minutes. I'm
Cool.
going
Cool. And I probably have to go. I have to go in like 15 minutes. I have to do a bunch more work before something else. But I'll be able to hang out for a little bit longer.
Yeah, it seems to me like the fundamental problem is that there's like just an amazingly critical shortage of nice places to live, right? Because if the concept is you make a place nice, it becomes way too expensive. That means that there's there's such a shortage of it that people are willing to spend a ridiculous amount of money, right? Whereas if almost every city in the U.S. was really nice to live, it wouldn't necessarily be such a big deal if your street got upgraded because there's 50 other choices in the city to choose from. Whereas if there's just one in the entire San Francisco Bay Area, you can see how a bidding war would price people out of that. So I guess like the long term solution is like you just have to build a lot more of it. I guess the short term would be when the developers move in and they have this rule of a certain percentage of it has to be affordable. I would say that plus you have to offer it to the original inhabitants there, so it would be affordable and people who used to live there have first crack or first bid at it, so that way you're not displacing them because it's not their fault that.
I think maybe it goes back to what we said, what I talked about in the beginning, is that changing the actual details of the type of street. So that's just what we do, and it's not like, oh, this is the not as nice street and these are the nicer ones. It's just like, this is what we do every time, is we give you that space, and we did that to this standard. But we have to do a lot of tweaks. Adam, how are your road widths in New Haven? I haven't looked at New Haven lately on a map, but do you have a lot of space in the existing right of way? Is the space you have to take? Is it from the street or is it from the back of walk?
We do have a lot of street space. We do have a lot of like multi-lane one-way arterials. Some of our major streets have 100-foot right-of-way width, back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk. Yeah, but we also have some narrow streets that are only 30 feet curb to curb, and so those are usually one-way streets with parking on both sides. But it could be a two-way street with parking on one side, something like that. But yeah, we're doing road redos. We are taking space from the existing asphalt and repurposing it to something else because it's too wide, and we need to show what our priorities are here going forward.
I don't think a road through a city should ever be more than 4 lanes ever. Like if you have the street and then you have the road, and then the only reason you're adding beyond 2 lanes in both directions is that you're trying to compensate for traffic backing up at the intersection. And if traffic's backing up at the intersection, your choke point's the intersection, not the road leading up to it. That to me seems horribly inefficient that you're expanding dozens of miles of roads, just instead of just making the intersection operate more efficiently or putting in a good bike path just to take off 10% of the cars off the road to then solve your problem, right?
Although I will say the good thing about having wide roads is that they do give us a lot of room to work with when we have to.
Great to start with, sure.
Yeah. I'll give
It's
a
like
good example of the city of Fremont. I don't know if you heard me talk about this example before, but the city of Fremont is a big cut through. The freeways would back up and people would get onto the local roads and cut through the city. And so then they narrowed all their lanes to 10 and 11 feet, put in huge buffers on all their bike lanes. And then they did their 85th percentile speed analysis. And then they were able to reduce speed limits on a lot of the roads and then change the classification to actually add more crosswalks on a lot of the roads because people were driving slower. And then they added enough crosswalks and more that they were able to add protected corners on a lot of the roads because they already had everybody kind of back onto the freeway who was doing the cut through now. And so it was a way of kind of taking the streets back. And so I think a lot of cities got to start taking that real estate back somehow, whether it's for public space, walking or biking, but slowly taking back the space. But the thing we have to think about is how to do that without making it crazy expensive. And that's just it's outside of our role as engineers, but I think it's something we still have to think about when we do this stuff.
We see. Hi.
Hello.
there.
Hi there. I'm in now.
I swear to God, I read maximum. And all of a sudden,
You know what? We had a lovely walk in Amsterdam. I went from Leidseplein and through the city center, and we saw some new development where they've removed a bunch of car parking and a few car lanes to make a little park and grassy tram tracks. It was really nice, and it's fine. Anyway, I can't stay for too long anyway because I've got a script that I need to get to the editor on Monday, and tomorrow I'm busy. I'm in Veenendaal because my son's at a speed cubing competition there, so lots of stuff going on this weekend. So I did listen to you guys for a while, and it was great. It was really good. Thanks for answering my questions about what to tell people what to do, because I get asked that all the time, and I've been putting it off for literally years because I'm not an advocate. I tried being an advocate. I failed at it quite badly. I gave up on it, to be honest. It's the blind leading the blind when people ask me what to do. What to do? I don't know. I moved to the Netherlands.
It's good advice.
Well, yeah, there you go, Stefan. You took that advice. There you go. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, it's really great talking to you. I really appreciate your channel. I'd love to ask, what was the story about behind the name of Not Just Bikes?
Oh, actually, that is in the very first video that I did. I mentioned it at the end. I actually said, because there's a lot of great reasons why Dutch cities are so good, and it's not just bikes. But the reason for it was that okay, so the reason the channel started in the first place is because so many people, Dutch people and Canadian people, were saying, like, why would you move your family permanently to the Netherlands, right? Because we had lived all around the world, then moved back to Canada, and then we're like left and moved to the Netherlands permanently. So everyone's asking why. And so the channel only started as a reason to explain why. That's it. There was no other purpose. I was going to make like 12 videos. That's it. But a lot of people said, oh, it must be because of the bikes, because that's what they're kind of famous for. So that was also part of the reason. It's really not just bikes. It's so much more than that. Like, people come here and they see all the people cycling. But I think what they were missing is that it's like, a lot of people would then assume, oh, they have all these bike paths because they have people who cycle, or because their culture or something, right? Or like that's why they do it, when that's totally not why they do it. Like in the 1970s, there was a higher percentage of people cycling in the United Kingdom than there was in the Netherlands, and now that's obviously very different. And it had nothing to do with culture or people wanting to cycle. And even when through the 80s, people started cycling more. They weren't building cycling infrastructure. They were making the streets safer. And then once the streets were safer, people started cycling. And so that's what I really want to focus on, is that the bikes, I feel like, are like an indicator. They're an indicator that you're doing things right. But I almost feel like they're not the point. Like, you shouldn't be designing for the bikes. You should be designing for safer streets, making the city more accessible. And the bikes will tell you how well you're doing at that, but that's not the purpose in and of itself.
It's not like if you build it, they will come kind of idea. Yeah.
A little bit, but really, I think it's like if you make the streets safer, people will come
Yeah.
out and walk. They'll come out and cycle. And you see this in Tokyo, for example, which has like very little bicycle infrastructure. And on the main roads, it's actually scary as hell to cycle in Tokyo. But as soon as you get onto the side streets, there's all these people cycling, and they have no infrastructure whatsoever. The reason they
Mm.
do that is because the streets are really narrow. They don't even have sidewalks. They just have the very narrow streets with no street parking, and the speeds are very slow. And so in that kind of environment, people feel safe walking and riding bicycles. But it's not like they said, let's get more bicycles and build bicycle infrastructure. They just, again, made the streets safe, and then people come out and cycle.
Yeah,
Hmm.
they've launched the Stop Killing Our Children campaign, right? That's how it started. It was like
Yeah,
it's stop child murder. Like that's how
yeah,
it started.
stop to Kindermord, yeah. But I think what's important there is that the Netherlands in the 70s said, stop killing our children. They didn't say, we want to ride bicycles. They said, stop killing our children. They didn't even care about bicycles. Most of the people in the Stop to Kindermord didn't give a damn about cycling. Like, they probably never even thought that they would ever ride a bicycle, because in that time, when you read the newspaper articles from the 60s and 70s in the Netherlands, they talked about cyclists. They literally used terms like cockroaches, like infestation. They felt like all these people were riding around on bikes, and it wasn't significantly more than other countries at the time. Like I said, the UK had more, but they felt like people riding around on bicycles was a sign that they were in the old century, right? Like they weren't moving into the future. And so there was
Hmm.
very much this understanding that we got to get rid of the bicycles in order to progress into the future. And I was just walking along Leidsestraat in Amsterdam on my little walk that I did on TikTok, and it's interesting. That's a street that's very narrow. It has trams going down it, and in the 1960s, it was very, very crowded, completely full of traffic, bicycles, people walking, trams, and in order to speed up the traffic, they decided what they should do is get rid of the bicycles. So, like here it is, Amsterdam, and they said this street is too small. Let's make it off limits to bicycles, and it's still off limits to bicycles today, but thankfully it's also off limits to cars. But that shows you that in that time period in the 1960s, they weren't, not only were they not designing for bicycles, they were actively trying to get rid of them, because they just felt like it was just a curse on them, almost dragging them
Hmm.
backwards in terms of modernity. And again, the Stop the Kindermord and all of those things were really, really focused on just kids are being killed, people are being killed in the streets. Let's make the streets safer. And then once the streets were safer, then people started cycling. And then once people started cycling, they started demanding more
Hmm.
bicycle infrastructure on the main roads and things like that. And that's really the way it went in Amsterdam.
You brought up something very interesting that just it just clicked for me is that we need to design the roads so it's a cool place to be first, a
Yeah,
safe,
sure.
comfortable place to be, right? And then because we talk about a third place, we talk about like you hang out at work, you hang out at work, home, and then you hang out at the coffee shop, do you hang out at the restaurant, do you hang out at the
Yeah,
park? But a lot of times we're stuck transporting ourselves throughout our lives because of how spread out we are or more. But if the roads start being a cool place to be, a safe place to be, then that's a good starting point for folks. And then they'll eventually ask for bike infrastructure or because it's the most efficient way to get around. But
yeah,
first, making it a safe, nice, aesthetically pleasing place to be is, I think, is a good starting point for a lot of us, because our standards are very,
yeah,
very old and they haven't changed. And when I look at a picture of Amsterdam or a picture of a road in the Netherlands, it looks like a nice place to be. Not just for me, just because I'm nerd out on roads, but just because there's greenery, there's bricks, there's curbs. It just
yeah,
seems like a pleasant area. And so when you look at a road in the U.S., most of the time it's not a place to be. If it is, it's a commercial district, and that's the main focus is
yeah,
the businesses and the signs of the
yeah,
businesses and the parking for the businesses.
yeah.
But I think we need to change that, and it starts with space.
Well, I think one of the fundamental issues that you have in the United States is that there's still the focus on level of service and the focus on roads and streets being a way to carry people through it as opposed to being a destination in and of themselves. And that's where like what the UK is doing with the low traffic neighborhoods, which are highly contentious with NIMBYs, but they are wildly successful. As always with these things, I know you guys talked about this, Stefan talked about this already in this chat, that people push back against this stuff. Business owners, locals, they all say we don't want this. We want to stop this. But then once it's in place, almost nobody wants to give it up except for a few extremists. And I think that's the mentality that really has to change in order to make this successful, like London has done with its LTNs, low traffic neighborhoods, is to just say like, this is not a through street. Like this, the purpose of this place is not to go through it, period. Like by car anyway. And this is a place. This is where you come if you are visiting someone here or if you live here, and there is otherwise no reason to come here by car. And really fundamentally, you need to have fewer cars, and the cars you have need to be moving slower, because that's the thing that drives people away. Like there was a study done years ago in the United Kingdom that showed streets, and they did a study of how much people talk to their neighbors and which neighbors they talk to. And as traffic volumes increased, you saw like the connection lines between the houses just drop to basically just the people directly next to them. Like nobody hung out in the street. Nobody would even know the people who lived across the street from them because the traffic was too high. But as soon as you reduce that traffic, then people across the street start talking to one another. People start wanting to sit out maybe with like Stefan has said before, and like happens here in the Netherlands, people put tables out on the sidewalks and they chat with their neighbors. That kind of stuff can't happen in a high traffic environment.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Adam, I have a question for you. Is like with trying to do like what Britain's doing with the low traffic streets, we use different traffic calming tools like speed bumps and neck downs and stuff like that. But why hasn't diversion of actually shutting down the road for car traffic but allowing people to walk and bike really picked up on in American culture? Or is it's something that people are very afraid of? Why do you think that?
There's just an incredible amount of pushback. I know even internally, like our engineering department is pretty progressive of what we want to do, but we still even have to put back on like diverters and stuff. I think we're very concerned about like making people.
It's a little bit. Can't really hear.
Hey, Adam, you're breaking up. If you could repeat that, I didn't hear what you said.
Am I good now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just a lot of pushback from even the most like progressive departments here, in that if we're answering to the residents and we're telling the residents, well, now you have to drive a little bit longer to get to your house. There's just not a lot of appetite for inconveniencing drivers still. I think and actually creating like neighborhood streets where you're only driving there if you have to go home, like that's a great idea, but what area.
So why do you think the leadership is so against that? Like, is it because it's part of our American DNA to have the freedom to get everywhere as efficiently as we can via car, or is it because of our way we do traffic analysis is based on delay, and so adding delay is a function that goes against our traffic analysis? Like how do we fix this? Because it's got to be fixed.
Easiest way to kill a project for human scale livability is a traffic, right? It inconvenience the motorist. Second, we don't recommend it. I could go on a lot about that, but yeah, I think who's making the changes, unfortunately, a lot of their constituents are drivers. They're drivers first, and so there's a lot of momentum behind.
Well, why does the traffic department get veto power, though? Do they have veto power on the project?
At least here, they do.
Because
a lot of times that can be the case.
There's a chart in the Dutch traffic manual. There's a chart that literally says as the design speed goes down on a project, the traffic engineer's relevance to the project also goes down. So like when it comes to like a low traffic neighborhood, they don't even listen to what the traffic engineer says because they're like, you're not a relevant professional to the project, right? We don't want high traffic. here, so we don't need the traffic guy here.
Yeah.
That's smart. That's a great idea. So like you're saying like anything below 35 miles per hour is like kind of not in the traffic engineering realm, and everything above 35 miles per hour is something that we use macro traffic analysis for. But if you're on a road that's less than 35 miles per hour, we're thinking about safety over efficiency. And I think that's pretty cool. Pretty cool,
It's just
interesting
less
logic.
relevant, like bringing in a structural engineer to like look at a very small house. It's like, yeah, you could, but they're more going to be more they're going to be more suited to work on the skyscraper building, in downtown, right? Yeah, I just had another point I wanted to add. I think in some ways you have to think of traffic deaths like a disease in a way, because it's like, back in the Middle Ages, when they used to have cholera, right? And the doctor made the discovery, like, oh, all of the wells are getting poisoned, are right next to where all the sewer lines are. And like he literally made a map of it, and he literally was like, oh yeah, we just have to separate our water infrastructure from our sewer infrastructure, and yeah, problem solved. And I'm like, it's a similar thing with traffic. Like, oh, if you how all the areas of people live, high speed car traffic going through it. Oh, that's where all the people are dying. Like, okay, well, let's not do that then. Like we this is a medical death that we can prevent, right?
I think
Like,
I'm going to steal that analogy for a video sometime. That's a good one.
please.
I know cars are like the color of the 21st century.
They are something. That's like whenever you come, it's like when you've been red pilled, right? And you come back and you're just like, you ask someone, how can you stand living in the parking lot? How can you stand, going out for a nice bite to eat, and you have a beautiful view of the surface lot? And it's like they don't. It's like some of the Middle Ages who doesn't realize, oh, I live in a sewer. I'm like, well, you live in a parking lot.
I think though, and as Everyday Engineering was saying, that people have all this pushback to it because they're drivers. There's certainly an element that these people don't know any other alternative, right? Like they know nothing else. Look, I get this all the time with my YouTube channel. The comments are full of completely ignorant people. Like they know so little. I'm not even talking about like knowing what urban planning is. Like they don't know that's a thing, but they just don't fundamentally know how other people live in the rest of the world. They've never experienced it. They have no idea. When they think about taking public transit, they think about that bus that's like a kilometer away from their house that only comes every hour by the schedule, but can be anywhere from 45 minutes late. That's what they think. So they think, I've got my cars and traffic, and that's bad, and this is a problem, and I don't like it. But the alternatives are way worse. Like, not even a little bit worse. Like, you'd have to be desperate to take them worse. And that's the level of discourse that's happening in a lot of places. And there's no easy way around that. I mean, as I said, in London, they get huge pushback on their low traffic neighborhoods as well. They get people pushing the barricades aside and, protesting in the streets or just driving through anyway as fast as they can, whatever. But what has happened in almost all cases, if the push is there to make it happen, people see the results for themselves for the first time, and they're like, oh, this is so much better than what it was before. And they don't mind driving a little bit farther to go to the grocery store or something because, well, first, it's so nice to be there. They're willing to put up with that. But in many cases, it actually takes less time than it did before. Farther distance, but less time because there's less traffic. But getting to that point is the hard part, right? And, if I had a solution to that, I probably wouldn't have had to move, right?
Well, it's a lot of how transit is poorly planned in this country. I sit on the transit agency's advisory committee, and the transit agencies, the way they historically did this is they covered it all for someone who is visually or disabled, so that at least they have coverage by a certain 30-minute walking from somebody's suburb to the bus stop. And that's not going to be encouraging for density. It's not encouraging anybody else to use it. It's only just an accommodation as a base factor. They're not really thinking about how many people can we get on the bus to maximize revenue or maximize moving people. They're just thinking about just accommodating. If somebody's stuck somewhere, how do they get around for that user? And that's for a lot of people that they're not that user, right? And so they don't see transit as an option for them. And we need to help people unlearn a lot of that. Problem is, the way they're going to unlearn that is by traffic getting so bad that they don't have a better option, and that's how
Yeah.
people are starting to learn it now. In the Bay Area, more people are using transit a little bit more recently because traffic is getting so bad after the pandemic, and people are starting to
Yeah.
think about their options. But we need more.
Yeah,
Uh,
I used to live in the Bay Area actually, but in the late
oh,
'90s, traffic was bad even
mhm,
then.
yeah.
But I made a video about this to anybody listening. You can look up Not Just Bikes. There's a video called "Americans Always Get This Wrong When Building Transit," where I talk about it's mostly about land use around transit, but the way that transit is approached in the United States is everything's designed for cars, and then transit is there for the people who are who just can't drive. But usually transit's only really thought about in terms of when the traffic gets so bad, we're like, oh my God, the traffic is terrible. We can't afford to, we don't have enough money in the budget to expand this road or something. Oh, I've heard transit can make traffic better. Let's put in transit. So like it's very much a car first approach, and it's only once you hit the limits of what you can do with cars do people start thinking about transit. And I find the transit discussion is always, always, always so car focused. It's always like, we're going to do this so that we can free up the roads. We're going to do this so that we can like make it easier to travel by car. It's always that framing of the conversation. It's never transit for transit users. It's transit for making it easier for drivers. And the thought of like, the land use around it, like how can we put in rapid transit and then put in, more walkable places, more residential places right around these transit oriented development, that kind of thing. It's like that's not really the main conversation that's happening. That's where certainly the public, that's where a lot of the politicians and even many of the engineers are coming from. The public are coming from, and even more just like there's the bus is for other people, but I'd like them to get on the bus so that I can drive easier.
I don't want to be with the bus people, right? That's what they say.
Well, in
Yeah.
some cities, unfortunately, but I mean, that's just from a lack of investment. Like I think again, when I lived in London, England, where I remember because I grew up in London, Ontario. Like it's your typical mid-sized North American city. The buses were shit. I took them before I got a license, but once I turned 16, there was no way in hell I was going to take the bus anymore. Um, and then here I am in London, England, and like there are people in like Armani suits on the bus next to me because they're going to their job at some bank. And that was just blew my mind. I'm like, whoa, they're like people that don't have to take the bus are taking like financially have to take the bus are taking the bus. And that's really that's really the transition that needs to happen. But people will do that if it's a better way to get around. And that's fundamentally what the issue is that I've seen in cities all over the world. Like the vast majority of people will take whatever's the most convenient way to get around. There's always holdouts. There's some people who bike no matter what, some people that will drive no matter what. I'll take the tram no matter what because I'm a crazy person that way. But most people just want to get from point A to point B, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like commuters are consumers in a way. Like they're going to behave like most rational consumers and take the most, affordable, competitive option. Right? Makes sense.
Well, we are
Yeah, the
consuming
problem
if you
is,
think about it. Like
yeah,
when you're eating food, you're using your hands. When you're texting, you're using your hands. When you're driving, you're using your hands. It's still occupying your time and it's occupying you. So we are still consuming it when we are transporting ourselves. And there is money exchanged when we're transporting ourselves as well, money and time. And so people really do think about people value that in we need to get to a place where we have people who are in the Armani suits taking the bus because it's just the best way to get around. Um,
yeah, that's fundamentally it, right?
I
I
hear
mean,
it's
it's
starting
it's not
to
like
do.
sorry, I was just going to say, like, I've said this a million times, but like, it's not like people in Japan are all like train fans, right? Like, people in Tokyo don't just love their trains. Some people do, but look, I've been to Tokyo so many times on business. They take them because you'd be stupid not to, and it's kind of the same way in suburbia, right? Like when I'm in London, Ontario, I drive everywhere because I'd be stupid not to. Why wouldn't I drive? But that's the part the city can make the decision on, right? You make it stupid not to do X and make X the thing that's beneficial for people, right?
Yeah. I was gonna mention that I think I heard that Florida is starting to shift because they have a company called Brightline. They're the Brightline
Mm.
train, and they've been upgrading a lot of the train tracks, and they have a functioning line. I don't know exactly how fast it goes. I don't know if you could technically call it high speed or not, but they're getting ready to open up like a new track next year to like that'll cover most of the state, and it you can get from one state to the other now. Basically, half the time is car driving. And a lot of people now are talking about like, yeah, why wouldn't I take it? I'd be stupid not to take it. You know, I can go to the train
Mhm.
station, hang
That's it,
out, and
right?
they're clean and comfortable. Like, I don't want to be stuck in traffic for 8 hours. Screw that.
Yeah.
I'll be intrigued by seeing how they do because we all know it's difficult to make money in transportation. You know, the roads are subsidized, Uber is subsidized, all the scooters are subsidized, transit subsidized. You know, everything transportation is subsidized. And so I'll be
Yeah.
intrigued to see how Brightline does. You know, and I think it's the same company that's also building the railroad from L.A. to Vegas. I think it's the same company as
Yeah. Right.
Brightline. I might be
Yeah.
wrong.
That
But I'll be intrigued. Do you think it's a good idea for more private things to own public transportation or public stuff? You know, we have a private toll road in LA. You know, is more that's the best road in LA is the private toll road. You know, and so is is that where we're headed in America? You know, the scooters can pay for the bike lanes. Facebook and Google and tech companies are paying for the bike lanes around their campuses. You know, my project in downtown San Jose was paid for by the Knight Foundation. You know, and so. Is that where we're headed? Where we're now because the public sector is lacking, is more private developer tech transit money, you know, private transit money into the public system.
Be an option. It's not. It seems like where we're heading right now, but it probably shouldn't be like the go-to. You're on the generosity.
You're breaking up quite a lot there. Maybe you might have to move a little closer or something. I don't know if it's clipping or like cutting off the threshold or whatever.
Yeah, my battery's running low a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was just saying that it seems like where we're heading, but it probably shouldn't be where we're heading. We
Yeah.
adequately fund government departments and not rely upon the generosity of these big tech corporations that want to design growth.
I mean,
There's
I agree. I personally think it's the complete wrong way to go. Now, is that the place you're going to go? Is that going to improve the United States? That's entirely possible. I think, like, fundamentally, though, I think it's completely wrong. You should. But, you know, here, I live over here in socialized Europe, right? So it's a totally different situation. But I think it's completely wrong. But I think, like, at the same time, look, if the public sector isn't cutting it, then I don't think you should refuse Brightline too, right? It's
Mhm.
sad to me because it's even with Amtrak, people expect it to make money. Nobody expects the highways to make money, but they expect the trains to make money. It's like Alan Fisher has a video out about how California high speed rail is way over budget and really late,
Mhm.
but nobody talks about Interstate 69, which is more over budget and more late. Have you heard anything in the news about Interstate 69? It's a complete clusterfuck. Like, and it's horrendously expensive. And nobody's talking about how Interstate 69 is costing like billions and billions more than anybody expected. But California high speed rails in the news all the time. And it's just not treated fairly at all. Like, even when it is within the public sector, the projects are totally not considered fair at all.
Mhm.
Connecticut.
yeah.
We have applied free transit buses for an executive.
Just
Um,
cutting.
sorry. Can
I
you
don't
hear
know
me?
what's going on with your audio there, but it sounds like the threshold for how loud you need to talk is just not triggering or something. But it's tough to say. It could also be dropouts. And
Yeah. What if I talk a little louder like this? Is that okay?
try it.
That's
Yeah.
So in Connecticut, we have statewide free buses through December. It's supposed to go a little further than that. And it's all in the news. Like, we need $40 million per year to cover the lost fare revenue. Meanwhile, they're pitching projects left and right, 300 million, 400 million. $1 billion for highway interchange projects, and no one bats an eye. It's always,
Yeah. I remember somebody online. I wish I could find this again. If anybody can find this, send me an email. But I remember seeing this blog that somebody made where they went through a bunch of infrastructure projects that were happening in the United States, and they were giving the price in in years of Copenhagen's bicycle infrastructure costs. So it would be like, this is going to cost 37 years of bicycle infrastructure in Copenhagen, and this one's here is going to cost like 112 years of bicycle infrastructure in Copenhagen. It was just really funny to see it that way because it's so comical. There was a highway interchange in New Jersey that was way overbuilt. It was like being built as a full clover leaves and all this stuff, and it was like totally not necessary. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and it was just mind-bogglingly expensive. Nobody cares. Like, nobody talks about that. But then they're over talking about, some bike lane project in Hoboken that's going to cost like $60 million. I'm like, this is like 1/50th the cost of this interchange that nobody cares about.
Yeah, I think we need to highlight that more. Maybe I need to do some more of that on my channel, because I see these numbers all the
Yeah.
time. I'm the transit agency I'm on is actually a congestion management agency, so we manage all the interchanges as well. And so the interchange pricing is like multiple times what it costs just to do our transit improvements. And I think I need to highlight that more because people don't realize just the magnitude of it, how much the city can do for those billions of dollars. Even I also do these, we call them PAD, but it's like an environmental documentation of the multiple interchange alternatives before we actually do an interchange, right? And so we actually draw up 17 interchange alternatives before we actually go and do one interchange alternative as part of the environmental study with working with the state. And that costs millions and millions of dollars just to draw it,
Yeah,
and
right.
just to develop that study, right? Of all these different options, and all those options aren't, including bike ped. Bike ped is maybe some of those options, right? And so it's there's a lot of money being spent on just studying and just doing highways over and over again, and eminent domain, all of it. And I think people just don't understand the magnitude of those costs. And I think there's nobody highlighting that because it's hard to point the blame at that, because it's not, is it every car manufacturer lobby? Is it every person, but in a train, you could be like, it's this company, it's this group, right? It's much more targeted. And so maybe we need to do a better job of highlighting those costs online so people realize, hey, that's a lot of my taxpayer dollars going for what? I'm not, am I going to be here in 50 years to drive like that? Like no, right? And so,
Well, I think this is where it works for some people. Different messages work for different groups of people, right? You really have to mix it up. But this is like the strong towns thing, which is why I've really promoted strong towns a lot, because they come at it from a totally different point of view. I mean, Chuck, who runs strong towns, takes a totally different view than me. He's very much like a fiscal conservative guy. He's like a lifelong Republican and everything. And all he's cared about when he started it anyway, I mean, he cares more now about other things, but all he cared about when he started was the money. He was looking at it going like, we're spending all this money on widening these roads in Brainerd, Minnesota. Like, who the hell cares about Brainerd, Minnesota, right? It's like 15,000 people or something like that. And we're spending all this money that we don't have, and then we have to go petition to the state and get money from them. And then it's like, and what are we doing this for? Like, we can't afford this. Like, we can't even keep the street lights on overnight. We're closing libraries. Like, and yet we're doing this, and why? And I think that was where he came from. And what was interesting about all that is that he came to the same conclusions that I did and many of us other urbanists did, that it was the same end goal. It was that we need to have fewer cars out there. We need more people in public transit. We need more things within walking distance. We need more people cycling. And he came to that conclusion, not caring at all about walking, cycling, and public transit, just the money. And so I think there are ways that certain people, that's what triggers them, right? Some people, you'll talk about nice streets and stuff. They're like, I don't care. They don't, and they don't. Whatever, they don't care. So you have to find out what they do care about, and those people usually care about money.
I think there might be an alarm bell going off if you need to ask a private company to build that infrastructure, because okay, they build it, then who maintains it, right? Like if the tech companies are building it, what happens when the tech companies, move, if they move their campus to another state, right? Then who takes it
Yeah.
over? And then the city suddenly has to inherit the liabilities, right? So like I think in the Netherlands, part of the project is, okay, what's the ongoing maintenance schedule and the maintenance cost of this going to be, all taken into account when they decide to build it or not. Kind of like a late follow up to the question that the EU is kind of doing this rail liberalization thing where you're seeing more and more. So the the state companies are still kind of building the rail infrastructure, but you're seeing more and more private operators and private train companies bidding for for permission to operate on certain tracks and routes. Like they passed this really big liberalization law at the EU level, and it's like playing out over 20 to 30 years. But basically, how I understand it is the countries themselves are still working on building out the infrastructure, but they encourage competition between the private operators to try to bring the cost of fare down and trying to make it easier to take the train between different countries instead of just flying.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to work, but we'll see. Anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got to head out now, but this was awesome.
Yeah, it's getting pretty late
Yeah,
here too.
sure.
Yeah, it's good to talk. To
Yeah, I have to head out too. But this has been great to talk to everybody, and not just Mike. It's great to meet you. Huge fan.
Nice to meet you,
Thank you, and I think it's great that we're all tackling this from different angles, and coming up with the same goals and coming up with the same solutions. So, not just Mike, you've been doing this for a little longer than Adam and I. Do you have advice for us as creators or as engineers of putting it out there and talking to people? Do you have any lessons learned or advice for us before we go?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I've only been doing it since 2019. Actually, I'm not sure if it's been that long, but I, it's a highly frustrating thing to be a content creator online because like it's just some of the stuff you have to put up with, especially as you get larger, with comments and people not understanding and all the nonsense that goes on Twitter and everything else. I guess all I can say is like just make sure that you're making stuff that you enjoy, because otherwise you're never going to be able to get through it. And I see that in yours, that the Mr. Barricade stuff is obviously like that. There must be some joy in there because you have a pretty big smile on your face when you're doing it. I mean, that's the only thing that's kind of keeping me sane is that I really try to like block out all of the noise that happens from the internet, especially as you start to get into as many followers as you have and I have. That's it's too much for any human being to handle, and so you got to really just try to block out the internet as much as possible and focus on like, this is the message I want to send, this is what I enjoy doing, and just really put your all into it as much as you can. Anyway, that's the only thing that's kept me going, to be honest.
No, I feel that's why I do my dance videos in front of food or other things, just because that's what I like to do. That's what really fun, and I'm trying to incorporate it more with engineering more and more. But it's a good balance that I try to maintain, and but yeah, you got to have fun with it every time. It's stressful to put out videos all the time, and I know I take breaks. Taking breaks is important.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, it is. Yeah, I'm about to take one myself after this video is out, but I really got to get my script to the editor on Monday. So,
well, I'm gonna jump off. This is great. Thank you, Stefan.
Thanks so much, guys.